Thank you. We now have a quorum, and we will begin the meeting in open session. We did not hold a closed session this evening because we did not have a quorum, although there were no action items on that agenda. So now I would like to request that somebody make a motion to approve the agenda with one addition. I'd like to add an urgency item, and the urgency item is approval of a team field trip, and will be provided information from the superintendent. And it'll be at the end of the meeting. We'll each get a copy and go over it. A full explanation will be provided at that time. Can I ask for a motion, please?
With clarification, so the urgency item is not being added to consent agenda. It's an action.
No,
separate.
it's a yeah, so that we can
So moved.
it. Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. So now I'd like to ask if someone would like to volunteer to read the board norms. I'm happy to. I don't think I've done it for a while, so I will do that. Unless somebody's itching to do it. Would you like to do it? Okay, thank you. Why don't you go ahead? I don't know if my microphone is
So the board will come prepared and be fully present and engaged, deliberate effectively and listen openly without interrupting, work collaboratively and build towards consensus, maintain perspective with a sense of humor, not repeat each other or ourselves, not have side conversations, give full attention to the proceedings, focus on the best interest of all students, and commit to no surprises.
Thank you, Karen. So the next item is the consent agenda. First, I'm going to ask if there's any public comment on the consent agenda. Any public comment on the consent agenda? Okay, I see no public comment on the consent agenda. So now I'd like to ask trustees or student trustees if you would like to have anything removed from the consent agenda for discussion.
Weren't the books, the pathway books, being pulled from the consent agenda? Is the speaker working? Our microphones are working, but is the speaker working?
There.
There?
Yep.
Okay.
I can hear.
I can't.
Yeah.
So.
If we
Right.
could pull, I think it's
I just needed to have it.
15D.
15B?
No, hold on, let me double check.
It's 15H, approved textbook supplementary book list.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to ask that we pull that and table that.
Pull and table, okay. So I can ask for approval of the consent agenda minus 15H, which will be completely pulled and tabled. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, that passed. Welcome, student trustees. Really happy that you're back. So I know that we postponed the orientation, but I think it's probably fortuitous because it gives you time to work with Karen Lobica, who's the new liaison to the board, and we can kind of develop a probably more up-to-date student trustee orientation since you've done it for a year. So I don't know about my fellow trustees, but it'd be nice to hear from each of you what starting school has been like so far for you on your respective campuses. If you have anything to report out, we'd love to hear it. So how about if we just start with Maddie? Thank you.
So yes, the school year has begun. At Drake, we had our day one event, which is a whole school event we do every year as a sort of ease you back into school. So we have lots of presentations around our slogan of that year. So this year it was D nice and say hi, like D high, Drake high. So that was focusing on being nice to others and the community and yourself. So we had one of the rotations was a mindfulness rotation about being kind to yourself, and then there was another one that was more about being aware of your surroundings and being kind to other people, and we also had a speaker who spoke along those lines. And then the second half of the day, we had teachers take, we've made pirates as an acronym, and each letter represents different things. So we had you go through a very short Monday schedule, and then, so that's where you have all your classes. And then the teachers taught a brief lesson about the letter that they were assigned. So then it was sort of an introduction to your teachers, but without actually getting thrown into the class environment yet, to ease you in. So then, yes, we have 352 freshmen this year, which is quite large. And this year we also have a new SLC, a small learning community, freshman, sophomore, to help cope with the larger number of students. And that SLC is sort of like for kids who don't really want the SLC curriculum, so it's still structured in the same way in that you have a group of teachers that specifically teach you classes, and they look out for your well-being, and you're with a group of 100 students. And those are split up into smaller classes, but it's not as, all the other SLCs very much have a idea behind them that a group of teachers have come together to create, but this is more just a very regular high school experience for students who want that. So then I'll be reporting about how that is going as the year progresses. So then that brings me to our Student Senate. Will be working on evaluating that SLC and also just thinking about our SLCs in the future. That is going to be the biggest thing we'll be working on this year. The other smaller thing the Student Senate will be working on is relooking at our dress code. Our dress code is basically not enforced at all. So then we're thinking about taking it completely off the books or really, really trimming it down. And just looking at the gender equity aspect of our dress code and making sure that it is equitable. And then just some fun news. Our football team won their first scrimmage, which is very exciting for Drake. That doesn't happen often, so we're very excited. And then our field hockey team wasn't sure if they were going to get a coach, but they found a coach. Our engineer has decided to teach them, so that's very exciting. And then finally, junior night and senior night are coming up.
Thank you.
Okay, so Redwood also started. We have back to school night this Thursday. So parents are going to come. Super stressful for them to walk through the crowded hallways. And then leadership will be helping them navigate that. We had the back to school dance that first Friday of school. And like always, there's about 1,000 people there, which is our most well-attended dance. Freshmen through seniors, which is something that we've struggled with. So leadership is trying to find ways to get more people to go to homecoming, because we have much less attendance for that, and it's just really seen as an underclassmen dance. So we're trying to learn from what goes well at the back to school night, or at the back to school dance every year. Leadership is also working to include more students and just be more representative of the entire student body. Freshman elections are this Thursday and Friday. And we've been talking about ways to maybe regulate those campaigns, maybe putting a spending limit or trying to regulate the use of social media, just because it's become pretty annoying when everyone makes an account for their campaign and then tries to follow you, and it's just gotten to be a lot. And so we tested something out on the freshman elections this time, but the problem with them is that they don't really know what they're doing, so they didn't really use social media. But so we're still learning and working on that. There's a Soar Workshop on September 20th at Drake. So the new Soar class is going to be going to that for just more training. And then we have a Breaking Down the Walls workshop on the 18th and 19th. So that's just different groups around Redwood. So I know Link Crew is sending some representatives, leadership, I think SOAR as well. And so that'll be during the school day, just in the small gym. And we did our first day of school a little bit differently this year. Last year there was a short rally, and classes were even shorter. I want to say they were maybe 20 minutes, but teachers complained that that wasn't really enough to do anything. They just passed out the syllabus and then kind of sat there. And then people, as much as the leadership class wishes that people would like rallies, people just don't. And it wasn't like student and teachers. And the first day of school rally last year, it just wasn't very spirited or anything. It was they were trying to be like unifying for the whole school, and they brought everyone down, and we all sat in the like circle on the gym floor and tried to squeeze everyone into that. But people just didn't really like that, so we got rid of it. And this year, there was no first day of school rally, but Link Crew did just a short tour for freshmen that started at 8. So let them basically walk through their schedule. And then everyone else got to school at 9. Class started at 9:07. So yeah, I think people liked that better, and I think the freshmen appreciated the tour the day of. So that was a good change.
So can you explain a little bit more about breaking down the walls?
Yeah, I know that one is just a community building thing for resident students. So I don't know if you know what the challenge day is at middle schools, but yeah, I think they do a lot of the same things, like cross the line and
So for all Redwood students are doing it, or just representatives from those organizations? Okay, and then what are they supposed to do with it? Because at the middle school, like all the 8th grade does it, or so what are they supposed to do with it? Do you know?
I think they're just trying to connect people to similar activities.
Hi. Okay. So I feel like TAM had a very exciting end of the year and summer, or exciting is the very wrong word, but eventful maybe. So I just will touch on that real quick. Way back when with our scavenger hunt, I think a lot of students really liked the town hall that we held. I think it was the Tuesday of finals week. Kids just felt like they kind of had their voices heard. I think parents liked it. I think overall it was really positively taken, and a good move by the administration on kind of how to settle that for the end of the year. And going into the school year within leadership and administration, we've already been talking about ways to shut down the scavenger hunt and starting that now instead of being like, oh, it's May, this is about to happen, let's not make national news again. So kind of starting to talk about that now and kind of finding small ways to kind of shift our culture away from that. And I have also just back at campus, anytime anything Italian is mentioned, there's a joke at TAM, which is not ideal, I guess, but people have been talking about it. TAM News did activity today. We got a lot of emails, and various student organizations on campus got emails from random news organizations, some Italian, some American, some legit, some kind of, for lack of a better word, sketchy. So kind of we did like a talk about kind of how to respond to outside people asking for you to talk about our community. This year, a lot of students have been talking about classes are really big this year. A lot of kids weren't able to get in classes that they wanted. A bunch of seniors randomly had, a lot of students, especially seniors, had gaps in the middle of their day, which was kind of a problem. So there was a big shuffle like 2.5 weeks into school, I want to say, where they cut a bunch of classes and created new ones in a different period. So kind of there's been a lot of student frustration over scheduling this year. In addition to that, 2 of our assistant principals are new, and our other assistant principal was new second semester last year. So it didn't go super well that we had a different scheduling kind of policy this year on how you could change schedules. Nevertheless, it was a brand new administrator trying to explain that schedule to you. So everyone was just frustrated. Teachers were, everyone was frustrated, which was not ideal, but more or less everything is kind of settled out now. Most kids are in the classes that they wanted. Sports are going really strong. The football coach this year is making the football team go to the girls' field hockey games and the girls' volleyball games. And because the football team is now going, other kids are going. So it's like the best attendance we've ever had at sports. Although I think football is a little hurt that they're not getting the same attendance that now these other 2 sports are getting, because like all 40 football kids show up to all these games now. But it's kind of creating a new sense of kind of fun school spirit that everyone's trying to pick up on and keep that throughout the year. Our PE department didn't hand out uniforms this year, so sophomores and freshmen are no longer required nor given PE uniforms, which is, I have a sophomore brother, so his friends were talking to me about it, and I've heard from my Linkies that it's kind of confusing this year and kids aren't really loving it. There's a lot of not weird, I don't know how to describe it, talk over what shorts girls can wear because they want basketball shorts like the old uniforms used to be. But most girls are like, well, I went on the cross-country team. My running shorts for cross-country aren't acceptable for my PE class, but I have to, like, kind of bringing back some kind of dress code issues, kind of like you're talking about at Drake. That's kind of an issue that I don't think anyone's had to deal with in a while. So kind of the lack of PE uniforms is kind of causing some controversy and kind of weird vibes from that. Our SOAR is adding an administration this year. TAM SOAR has kind of been a little bit behind, I'd say, Drake and Redwood, but they're adding a president and vice president this year to try and get the club kind of going and creating events at TAM. And we had senior night and back to school night, and those are both a success.
Why no PE outfits or PE? Oh, as part of the
We
cut?
were told budget cuts,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So is that with all the campuses? Okay.
Yeah, so yeah.
But Drake didn't really have them beforehand. You could there were sometimes T-shirts that were given out, but otherwise they didn't have them. And you could also, you didn't always have to wear your T-shirt as long as you wore what they deemed an appropriate
Okay.
T-shirt.
Yeah, no, it
even
makes
though it was
sense. Okay. Thank
And
you.
you mentioned the larger class sizes. Obviously, that had some impact at the start of the year. Was there grumbling at that point, but has it settled down and so people are a little bit unhappy having every seat occupied, or are there still ongoing issues with it? How would you describe the attitudes for, I guess, all three of you in terms of that?
I would say at least at TAM, I know for a couple of the more like, I don't know how to say it, I guess like the upperclassmen classes, such as I know AP Spanish, there was like a 12-kid waiting list to get into the class. And that was like kids just, okay, 3? Oh, they were all told that it was like, I was told there was like 10 kids waiting. So rumors definitely were spreading, and I think they all got in eventually, but there were kids trying to get in. Or I know with our like, because we have our AIM program, which is a lot of our upperclassmen take part of, a lot of the like physics, calculus, those like AP biology, they're all offered on like a only set of like 4 periods in the day. So it's really tricky to try and sometimes get them, that since they're bigger class sizes, it just seemed like everything was kind of full, that kids weren't getting the exact schedule that they wanted. I know a couple kids who didn't get more or less sorted out, but I think it's fine now. Even a couple teachers have said, like in my AP Spanish class, he's like, oh, this year I'm teaching like 30 of you guys. Last year I taught 20. Like, it's going to be different for you. It's going to be different for me. But like more or less everyone's accepted it now. It's just kind of a shock at the beginning of the year being like, oh my gosh, like I've never seen the classroom this full.
I can say for Drake, we did have a couple of problems with it at the beginning of the year, which I forgot to mention, in that one of our AP Lit class periods, a bunch of kids dropped over the summer and moved to nonfiction. So then that rearrangement meant that we needed another teacher to teach a nonfiction class, but didn't have enough students to run that Lit class. But that wasn't quite realized over the summer because of when kids dropped. I think it was later in the summer and some at the beginning of the school year. So then a week ago, one of the AP Lit periods had to be dissolved. And then so that teacher could take over an AP composition Lang period, so that teacher could take a nonfiction period. But it meant the kids who were in that AP Lit period had to rearrange their schedules in order to switch to a different period. And then some kids had to either drop other classes or drop AP Lit altogether because they couldn't fit it into their schedule. And then we also have one AP Economics class, which is 40 kids, and that is 38. And that is just too many. So our administration is encouraging people to take the class online. They'll give them a free period, and they said they'll pay for it, and kids can take that option because that is just a very large class size.
One last thing. There's like the free. We had a lot of seniors with free 6, so they ended up dissolving a 5th period Econ Gov class and creating a 6th period, and then kids had the same kind of schedule flip, plus then a couple of students had teacher flips, which they're like, oh, I like just got to know my teacher. It's kind of a bummer, but like everything's more or less fine now as far as I can tell. Our kids are like, oh, like I wasn't never going to take APES, I was going to take physics, but I actually love APES, so whoa, like
Easier.
a couple kind of positive lights with the weird scheduling, but yeah.
I've mostly just heard a lot of complaints because obviously as all the schools get bigger, it's harder to guarantee a free 7th period. So I just know a lot of kids have been upset about that. So they'll have maybe a free 3rd, and then they have to TA for someone or pass out slips. So I've just heard complaints about that. And then we also had a problem with AP Lit. There were only 3 sections of it this year, and one of them is 7th period. And so a lot of kids didn't want that. And for some reason, we also had a lot of free 6th periods. So a lot of kids dropped the 7th period, and so now it's down to somewhere under 20 kids when it was supposed to be like 33. So some issues with that.
Tamascal, turn.
Okay.
How's Tamascal?
So, starting off at the beginning of the school year, we had our assembly. Our assembly changed a lot this year. We had a very big increase in class size. Pathways went from 24 to 48, so our senior class essentially doubled. In our senior meeting with Grace and Julie beforehand, that filled up the hub. So when we got time to do our teacher introductions, the entire school had to sit outside in the courtyard. I would say that wasn't the best, like it wasn't planned out, because it sort of just started without any preparation and announcement to the kids. The kids were sort of just standing there. Maybe next year or next semester they can bring out the chairs from the hub and just bring them outside, because it was sort of hard, like I would say the kids got anxious just standing there for about an hour, just waiting for the teachers to do their introductions, which is fun, but again, you're just standing there. So maybe bring the chairs out from the hub. Next, so we had advisory groups, which this year will be all during the same time. So we have a big mega advisory. That advisory will sort of be the base of our school's sort of part government, part like group culture environment. It has yet to be fully planned out, but I know we're going to have like holiday parties that the students are going to plan, and I know that we're going to have conversations led by students about issues in our school. So I'm hoping it turns into a beginning to a student government at Tamascal, which we haven't had before. So I'm looking forward to that. Also, something that a few students particularly complained about was photos. Photos happened after lunch instead of the normal 8 a.m. photos. And because of that, we had already run around, we had already played our games, we had already eaten a mountain pizza, so we were pretty disheveled. So instead of doing our photos at 8 a.m., we did them at 1 o'clock, so we were kind of messy. It's a tradition. We have a mountain of pizza. All the Redwood kids walk by and look at our mountain of pizza. It's fun. Yeah. We have a bunch of new teachers this year. I think they're adjusting quite nicely. I have a few of them myself. It's definitely a transition. I've noticed that a few of them are adjusting to teaching their 5 days a week classes in the 2 days or 1 day a week, and then transitioning to the abundance of homework that they now have to give. It's different, but they're learning. So we're giving them support, and they're catching on. Something that I've heard throughout, and that it's hard to complain about at Tamascal, because again, it's only 15 kids, but our classrooms are also getting packed. Like, I know, it's hard to complain. But in our science class is only a kitchen table, and that table is full. We have to go sit at the other tables in the room. So now it's hard because we only have one chem class, we only have one physio class, we only have one physics class, and if there's no seats left, you can't take it. So it's hard because they don't want to kick someone out of the class, but there are no seats. On September 11th, there is senior night. We've had to split senior night into 2 segments, an earlier segment for alphabet, the first half of the alphabet, and a later segment for the second half of the alphabet, because we have gotten too big, even just the senior class, because including parents, we don't fit in the hub. Again, there'll be food for Tamascal tradition, and yeah, Julie and Grace will tell us, all the seniors, what to do. It should be fun. Actually, yeah, one more thing. We got our new sis tutor, Kate Walera. She seems really good. She just arrived last week. I'm really looking forward to getting to know her better.
Okay, so at the beginning of the year, San Andreas had a breakfast which was like pancakes, bacon, eggs, fruit. It was super nice. The new students kind of were a little surprised by it, so they thought that that's how all of our breakfasts are going to be until they were, until the breakfast from Redwood came the next day and everyone was like, wait, where's our pancakes? We also had barbecue for lunch with like hot dogs, ribs, and hot links. It was really good, but same thing. They also thought that was going to be our lunch. And I mean, even though it started really well, it's kind of gotten to the point where it's like do have really big classes now, which is weird for the old students and normal for the new students, because my essay class, which last year would have only been like 10, maybe 6 students, is now 25 students, and there's literally no space in the class whatsoever, especially with our tiny portables. So would love if that would change. And I do know that our science classes are very small. I have one other student in my science class for environmental science. It's weird, but I actually like it because she's my friend. But in actual news, as Andrea's, I'm starting our leadership, which was dropped as a class and now is a club after school. Our first meeting is the 12th, and I'm starting our student government. We're currently looking for a vice president, secretary, and treasurer. Not really having elections, more of like a dictatorship. But yeah, I mean, we'll probably have elections for next year's, but currently there's no real people to like that would actually like elect others. Yeah, I'm George Washington. But with our first few members in our government, we're going to be taking a trip to Marin Oaks, which is organized by youth leadership with all the other alternative schools to, basically create a project that we're going to work throughout the year. And it's to like kind of build a community with all the alternative schools. And we're also going to be going to the first SOAR meeting, which is September 20th. Fun. I didn't know it was at Drake, so even more fun. And in our peer resource, we're doing interactive activities that focus on our social, emotional, and moral and logical points of view in trying to really build our community and the environment at our school. And since our peer resource is being headed by our English teacher, Bob Benson, it's kind of a shift for all the older students because we're used to Corey, who this year was replaced by Katie. Sorry, don't know her last name. We don't use last names. But this year has actually started off pretty well. And everyone seems to be getting to know everyone really well. I really like the small school environment and the fact that I know everyone at my school and I know all their names and their faces. And it's just really nice, and I'm happy to be back.
Thank you. That's very nice to hear. Any questions?
Of course.
Of course.
Which is not necessarily for you, but it's off of the. Is that so? I teach at a different school where kids can't drop things over the summer, particularly AP courses. So is that standard at our schools that they have leeway to drop? Because I remember signing those contracts.
No,
for my kids.
our AP students are supposed to sign. They do sign contracts. I think practice has been a little bit different site to site. It has been a culture here, though, where in the past kids could come back and say, you know what, I've decided I don't want to take this and I want to take that. And prior to this year, we've had room, to make those kinds of changes. But this year, we sort of had to say to people, no, the classes you chose in the spring are the classes you're going to have to live with because we can't accommodate them. I do want to note, though, just for clarification, that San Andreas has not increased in size, nor has it lost any FTE. So that's just a point of clarification.
Oh, now that our one AP class, AP Comp, has now changed our sort of code from seniors only to seniors and juniors, it's now sort of on a lottery-based system with the juniors. So we had to make a cutoff to allow juniors, but some of those juniors ended up dropping it over the summer because they realized the load was just too high. Mm-hmm. So we do have empty seats now, but it's too late to add. so it's sort of a waste. It's a process. I don't know how we could do it in the future, but I would say just having the class available to juniors is a good idea, but maybe have a requirement to do it.
Yes, Charlotte.
Sorry, what you said, Tam, I was definitely talking to some kids, and they're like, why can't I switch? And I was like, because, like, we were kind of explaining, Tam tried to do meetings in March this year to, like, you'd sign up for your classes in February, whatever it was, and then late March, early April, you met with your counselor for 5 minutes, being like, yes, do you really want these courses? And there's definitely, I overheard conversations with kids. I had conversations with kids that it's like, yeah, like, I understand that I signed the contract, but, like, it's definitely more of a culture thing. Like, it's not undoable. It's just very different than it has been in the past. So it's kind of like,
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
just list, it makes sense. It's going to be an adjustment, and I think we realize how lucky we all were in years prior, that it's kind of unusual. The kind of flexibility we used to have is not very common, so we have to work together on it. So it's good getting your feedback of how it's going, so thank you. So next item, I will recess for the public hearing. So we'll be holding a public hearing, TFT Sunshine Articles for TUHSD negotiations. Looks like I started to say Lars, and went, no, it's not.
No,
It's Ann.
not Lars.
Okay.
My name's Ann Jaime, and I'm the new president of the Tamalpais Federation of Teachers. And this year, we are sunshining 4 articles. I think they're the same 4 as the district, yeah. Article 2, working conditions. Article 4, absences and leaves. Article 6, evaluation. And Article 7, salaries and benefits.
Thank you.
Questions? No?
Any public comment? Okay. We're back in session, and now we're going to go on recess again and hold another public hearing, this time on sufficiency of instructional materials, and take action on Resolution 19-3, certifying sufficient instructional materials.
So this is the time for public comment on sufficient instructional materials.
So for clarification, is that a comment on instructional materials in our schools?
No, it's sufficiency of, meaning students, there's enough books and materials
Got
for
it.
students.
Okay.
Okay, so with this, we need to ask for a motion for Resolution 19-3.
I think you have to close the hearing.
Oh, it's closing the hearing. Okay, thank you for that. Now the hearing is closed. Now I'll ask for a motion for passing Resolution 19-3.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. This will be a roll call vote.
Ms. Lowica?
Aye.
Ms. Rodich?
Aye.
Mr. Oppenheim?
Aye.
Ms. Harlander?
Aye. Thank you. That passed. Now we'll move on to trustee considerations. The first item was Corbett Elson, and it's take action on the 2018-2019 unaudited actuals financial report. And we'll allow for public comment after the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Board, and nice to see you back, student trustees. It is my pleasure to present this evening to you the 2018-19 unaudited actuals. So we are just going to jump into things. As always, we'll have time for questions at the end, but feel free to jump in if you have any clarifying questions along the way. Otherwise, I'll keep moving along. So a quick reminder, why do we do unaudited actuals? So this is the last major look back on last fiscal year, the 2018-19 school year. We are looking at actual revenues and expenditures, as opposed to all along the way we're talking about budget relative to what we project will happen. Not anymore. We're talking about actuals after closing the books over the summer for last school year, which is pretty much the same as the fiscal year. We're always comparing 2 different data points at each report. What we're comparing tonight are the estimated actuals in June. While sometimes in June we're focused on the budget adoption moving forward, there's also a key component where we're taking an estimate of what our actuals will be at that point. But remember, we're in June. There's a lot of activity that happens throughout the spring that we haven't quite captured at that time. So we're comparing where we thought we were in June, our estimate, to where we are after we've closed the books throughout the summer. The business office staff works extremely hard to close out all the books to try to give an accurate picture that we're presenting this evening to compare. And these are the unaudited actuals. The goal, as always, is to provide as accurate of feedback as possible on the district's budgeting process. We will never be zero, the difference between the two, but our goal is to get as close as possible. The difference, though, does not really impact anything in the budget moving forward. The difference between the estimated actuals and the unaudited actuals, the delta, which I'll get to in a little bit, the sole thing that affects moving forward is our starting fund balance, our reserve for this current fiscal year moving forward. So everything in the budget that the board adopted and our multi-year projection in June, everything will be exactly the same. The only difference is the one cell that says starting fund balance, which will be slightly up as a result of our unaudited actuals. I'll get to that later on. And last, I just want to highlight, we primarily focus on unrestricted funds. There's a lot of information to absorb in the packet, but the unrestricted funds and expenditures are where we have the bulk of our activity and also the bulk of our discretion. And lastly, the unaudited actuals are required by law. Quick agenda, all the common pieces we'll touch on. This board knows, and a quick reminder to the community, that we are a basic aid school district. We're in the extreme minority of the state of California. Basic aid, just a quick review of bullet points. The fact that our local property taxes far exceed what our revenues would be if we weren't. Most of the state, it's the number of students they have times the dollars per student the state funds. We are in a fortunate place where our local property taxes exceed what that dollar amount would be. I want to highlight the bottom bullet point where the district is $18 million over what our entitlement would be if we were not. So we are quote unquote deep into basic aid, unlike some of our feeder districts that are teetering right on that edge. So let's talk about revenues, some key drivers and factors. ADA is something we focus on, average daily attendance. As we know, we've been going through some enrollment boom. Our ADA increased 239 students over the previous year. Quick reminder distinction, ADA is different than enrollment. Enrollment is just the number of students that have simply registered and enrolled in our school district. ADA is a percentage of enrollment, the students who actually attend every day. That's literally driven by daily attendance that our families and our attendance clerks take. But again, because we're a basic aid district, our revenues do not vary much related to ADA because we're a property tax driven district. I do want to highlight the bottom piece. So property taxes again grew last year. We came in at $63.6 million, which is a $3.9 million increase over the year before. That represents a 6.67% increase. So that is different from where we were in June. In June, we estimated, the Department of Finance in the county estimated a growth of 5.25%. That is up because of the particular note I want to highlight. We found that delta is roughly $822,000. That is a positive thing. Unfortunately, we have a kind of an anomaly there. A large portion of that increase, the $822,000, is a result of remapping of property taxes related to the Corte Madera Village Mall. That is a very unusual piece where about half of that $1 million we'll receive, but we'll be refunding that back in the 2019-20 school year. That's an assignment in a reserve. This is something that the entire county is experiencing. There's a lot more for us to learn. In fact, tomorrow morning at the county office of ed, all the district CBOs and the Department of Finance are meeting to talk through this, the mechanics of it. It's an unusual one-time event. It's more of an accounting piece that we need to learn more about. But again, of the $822,000 increase, roughly half of that simply will be refunded next year. But the delta, the remainder of that, is roughly $250,000. That's a real increase. That's ongoing. And that increase is consistent with historical trends from where the county predicts we are in June compared to where we actually end up in September. So I want to highlight that. You'll see more about that later on when we talk about reserves. And we're going to learn a lot more about that at MC Week tomorrow morning. Please, Charlotte.
What does the Corte Madera Mall have to do with it?
Yeah, so the Corte Madera Village Mall is obviously right over here. It is a large piece of property. It's valued as a high assessed valuation because that property is commercial. They drive a lot of business through that, and therefore they have a high valuation related to that. Those valuations basically determine how much property tax they pay to the county, and we receive a lot of that back. some of the uniqueness of why they've been remapping that property tax, to be fully honest, we don't have a complete answer to that yet. We're going to learn a lot more about that tomorrow. So let's talk about general sources of revenue. General purpose is a catch-all, but again, that is the bulk of our property tax revenue is seen there. There's some other components related to that. State funding, we do get some state funding, even though we're a basic aid school district. The bulk of that are restricted revenues related to state lottery and obviously special education funding that is primarily a state mandate. We do get some federal funding as well that primarily are related to the titles, the Title I, Title II, Title III funding that are restricted for specific uses related to that. But the second largest piece is our local revenue. And that's primarily driven by our parcel taxes that we have and our generous donations by our foundations. So that's the major components of our revenue that we have. Again, that's combined. That's unrestricted and restricted together. This delineates that difference slightly. You see the same categories and descriptions. The combined column on the far right is exactly the same numbers we saw before, but it highlights the unrestricted component of that. Again, $81 million of our $95 million of revenue are unrestricted discretionary, meaning we have discretion locally in terms of how we want to utilize that. It's not mandated by the state or the federal government. I do want to highlight, and we're required by law to disclose our Education Protection Account, or our EPA. For those that don't recall, in 2012, the state of California voters, via Prop 13, in the midst of the Great Recession, said, hey, we want to self-tax ourselves further to support instruction in the classroom. So we get funding as a result of those lottery dollars that relate to roughly $970,000. We're required by law to disclose that and ensure that's used for instructional purposes, basically our teachers and our counselors. So we're required to show our beginning balance, our revenues, and how we utilize them. We have a small balance of $54 that we will spend quite easily, if not already. Now let's move to the expenditure side of things. Again, the unrestricted and combined piece. Certificate salaries, classified salaries, and benefits, the first three rows, are related to personnel. We are, again, a people-based business in the industry of public education. As you might expect, the far bulk of our expenditures are related to people. In fact, if you look at our combined expenditures, 81% of our dollars are expended on the first three rows related to people overall. This is just a pie chart that kind of shows how that plays out. Again, the largest three pieces of pie, both charts, are related to certificate salaries, classified salaries, and the benefits related with all employees.
Corbett, can I ask a quick question? I'm trying to recall the certified salaries, when you look at the combined number, so clearly some of it is restricted. Is that for certain special ed funds? Okay.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, a lot of the certificate salaries for restricted are related to special education because they are restricted in the revenues. Therefore, we put the same expenditures tied to that as restricted. Yep. So I want to talk about contributions and transfers. The unrestricted side of the house is where the bulk of our action is, our revenues and our expenditures. But sometimes we need to contribute or transfer funds away from our unrestricted accounts to other restricted or other funds that may not have enough funding. So that's called a contribution when you go from unrestricted to restricted, or a transfer when you're going from unrestricted to another fund. Basically, you're backfilling places where there aren't enough funds to make it balance out. So the big common ones, and these are common ones across the entire state of California, our largest one is special education. We contribute last year just under $12 million to backfill our legal and moral obligation to make sure every student has the supports they need for their education. Restricted maintenance account, we also transfer funds over to make sure we have the appropriate funding required by the state to maintain our facilities. And other local program support that's related to some vocational ed requirements we have with our partnership with the county office.
And just to clarify for the audience, so the special ed, the $11.8 million that we transferred to the special ed funds, that's above and beyond what the federal government and the state government reimburses us.
That's exactly right. The revenues of the reimbursements we get from the state and federal government do not meet that. So beyond that, we have to contribute an additional.
Okay, so the state and federal government have an $11 million shortfall, $11.8 million shortfall in our district.
That's correct.
Thank you.
In addition to the 3 rows, I want to highlight other funds down below in the verbiage below that. We have a cafeteria special revenue fund, Fund 13, where we contributed $571,000. That's roughly the same we did last year, but given some changes we've made to staffing in our cafeteria fund, we don't predict we'll need that moving forward, but given some changes to staffing, how food is being delivered, we want to have a little bit of a buffer there. So I predict in the future that that transfer will be less. And also Fund 40, our capital outlay. That is, we transfer $1.1 million. We have a large planning process for large capital expenditures, football fields, soccer fields, sports fields. Obviously, we are embarking on, with our new next-gen science standards, the 3-year grad requirement. We're having to invest in 4 science classrooms across the district, 2 at Redwood, 1 at Tamasco, and 1 at San Andreas. So there's a lot of, obviously, health, safety, and infrastructure requirements related to that. So let's talk to where we're going to land in terms of our overall prediction, meaning where were we predicting we'd be in June, our estimated actuals, and then where do we actually end up in our unaudited actuals? What's the variance or difference between those two? So an informal success criteria is, again, we want to get as close to 0 as possible. Knowing that I will fail at that year after year that I'm here, a margin of error, though, a common practice is if we're plus or minus 1%, that is fantastic. That's great. We're not there, but hope to get there soon. If we're plus or minus 2% of where we predicted we would be and where we ended, that's considered informally good. And then plus or minus 3%, okay. And I have a dollar figure on the bottom. That's relative to our unrestricted expenditures. Let's take a look and see what the numbers show. So again, comparing those 2 points, we are going to have savings as a result compared to where we thought we would be in June. On the unrestricted side, the second bullet point, the difference between where we thought we would be in terms of where we actually ended up is $1.8 million for the better in terms of savings, which is related to roughly 1.97% of our budget. So again, we have less of an operating deficit than we actually thought we would have in June. Still an operating deficit, but not quite as significant. More to come on that. On the restricted side, we actually are going to have an operating surplus. That is a common practice given the restrictions related to restricted funding. The primary reasons related to that are special education, because our enrollment numbers and our special ed numbers across the district have gone up. Our state and federal funding that we have gotten actually went up. On the flip side, though, our special ed departments actually expended less money as well. So that's a positive note. That trend is not something we've had in the past. It's not in one particular area, but across the board, special education expenditures went down compared to where we thought in the past. So that's a positive development. Is it a one-year item or not? More to be seen, but that's a positive development. I want to give our special ed staff a shout out for that. We also received some federal funding in terms of E-rate. We get technology subsidies from the federal government, which is called E-rate, that came in higher than expected. Our foundations also made significant contributions, more so than they have in past years or been able to do. So combination of all that related to a surplus and a restricted side. But again, per usual and across the entire state, those amounts will carry over and be expended this upcoming year per the uses that they were defined when they were given to us. Let's go back to the unrestricted side. So that $1.8 million for the better, compared to where we thought, is in the okay range. So it's okay. I want to try to get it better, closer, but I'm glad it's a positive number for the better as opposed to the other direction. Again, my goal is to forecast and provide as accurate a picture as possible to the board and the community so we can make sure we're using every last dollar as best as we can in support of our students, but that's where we are. Let's break down that $1.8 million for the better in terms of specifics. Well, so again, in June, we're predicting we'd have an operating deficit of roughly $3.4 million. The $1.8 million variance for the better is what I just described. Therefore, we're ending the 2018-19 school year with an unrestricted operating deficit of roughly $1.6 million. So again, an operating deficit still, but significantly better than where we were certainly 12 months ago, but even in June. So let's break down what accounts for that $1.8 million difference. So that's what this slide begins to break down. The total variance is $1.8 million. Here are the major differences. Again, the largest one is what I foreshadowed in, I believe, the second or third slide. The property tax revenues came in higher than predicted, roughly $840K. But remember, roughly half of that, or I'm sorry, $500,000 of that is kind of an artificial one-time bump that we're going to pay back in refunding this upcoming fiscal year. So from a true growth point of view, it's roughly $250,000, again, consistent with past trends. Our parcel tax revenues came in higher as well, roughly $380,000. That is new and unusual. This past year, the board authorized a contract to do a very extensive audit of our parcel tax rolls. And that audit came back and found that there was roughly $380,000 of parcel tax revenues that we were not collecting. So that is ongoing revenue. So that is a very positive piece that is real and will continue into the future. Again, the contributions to special ed were a net $1.1 million less than we predicted in June. That's again a combination of a roughly additional revenue, roughly $400K, but much of it is less expenditures than predicted in June. And then transfers out, we did have a larger transfer to Fund 40, our facility fund, and that's primarily related to the 4 new science classrooms that we're planning to begin converting this upcoming school year for the following school year. All the equipment, the infrastructure, the safety measures, the lab tables, everything that comes along with a very modern, forward-thinking science classroom. And there's always the other odds and ends. I mentioned a few of them. E-rate subsidies, interest came back higher. The county treasury holds our cash. We get some interest collection. So in total, those variances add up to $1.8 million. Again, a black number for the better. Moving along to our reserve, or our ending fund balance for last school year. So this is a very similar picture to what we illustrated in June when we adopted the budget. The change, though, is the delta, the $1.8 million for the better, shows up in a couple areas. The unassigned and unappropriated reserves, our economic uncertainty goes up slightly. But the newest one is that CM, Corte Madera Village property tax and remapping. We assigned roughly $544,000 because we're going to have to refund that. We're going to have to pay that back. We received the additional revenue this summer. We're paying it back. It's truly more of an accounting piece than anything else. I'm just as curious as you are wanting to learn more tomorrow about that, as everyone is in the county. So let's look at other funds, not just our general fund, but let's look at our other funds below that. Again, the top row is the general fund we touched on. That's combined, unrestricted, and restricted. I'm not going to go through every single one, but a couple I want to highlight is our, Fund 13 has a net change for the better. It was roughly $18,000 to start last year, is $200,000 for the better. That is a direct result of the efforts of our foods cafeteria staff to make sure expenditures align with our revenues. And I want to highlight our capital outlay, third from the bottom. That's Fund 40. That is roughly $250,000 for the better. That is outside of our general fund. My one area of focus are our facilities and the needs and the large, very large projects we have across our district. So that is an area of focus that we want to make sure we're vigilant with and paying close attention to. As we know, facilities in California, we can spend funding quite quickly. So I want to pay attention to that. So lastly, I just want to reminders of uncertainties and prudence moving forward. This is the exact same slide in June because our uncertainties and prudence are the same. A couple highlights. We still have enrollment growth for one more year beyond this year. Our enrollment this year came in 37 students higher than we predicted last January when we based our staffing. Sooner or later, the economy will take a turn. We've had the largest economic expansion in California and America since the 1950s. Sooner or later, that cycle will turn. We, again, as I mentioned, have scheduled large facility projects, science room, field replacements. STRS and PERS annual increases are still statewide increasing larger than revenue increases, despite some of the support we've gotten from the state government to offset that. A continued statewide trend for special education costs increasing, aka an unfunded mandate, even though we ended up slightly better in terms of that compared to where we predicted in June. We're also assuming that the $5.8 million of expenditure reductions this board made this past spring and the previous board the spring prior, all of those are ongoing. So we need to make sure that we reestablish the culture related to that, the expectations for our staff to deliver that and provide the services appropriate related to that. And then obviously we have started a class size MOU with our certificated staff for 3 years. And our parcel taxes that we have, both the MOU and the parcel taxes expire in June of 2022. So again, the picture, the reason this slide is exactly the same because it is moving forward. We have an operating surplus slightly this year, but we also are projecting operating deficits next year and the year after that in our 3-year multi-year projection. So that is a similar picture, a much better picture than we were 12 months ago, even 3 months ago in June, but there's still much vigilance to be done to keep an eye on this. Lastly, next steps, one last shout out for the business office staff. I want to highlight again Ray Diakino, our Director of Fiscal, for his work on this, and everyone else in the business office. And then lastly, these unaudited actuals become audited actuals in December. Christy White is the auditing firm that will be visiting us in early November, giving us supportive, constructive feedback on how we did. We'll take that feedback. We'll bring back an audit report to you so we get a report card and you can understand what their perspective is, and we'll finalize the books at that point by December 15th. So with that, I will pause and see if there's any questions or comments.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that, because I think communities don't understand how much we spend on special education, and not arguing for any less on special education because of what's involved. But, and I didn't ask for this ahead of time, so if you don't have the figures, I understand. So we have $11.8 million added to backfill special education.
Correct.
Off the top of your head, do you know how much revenue we receive from the federal, state? So what was our total expenditure on special education?
I don't, but
Okay.
I can give you a little bit of a
Or like,
guesstimate.
yeah, an estimate.
In total, Trustee Owens asked that in June, and roughly we spent total roughly $18 million in special education expenditures.
Okay, so over 20% of our budget.
Correct.
Wait, so I just want to be clear, so if
Or about
18
20%.
million is what we spent and we backfilled by 11?
We only get a total of 10 from state and federal.
Yeah. So 18% of our budget.
That's correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then in terms of the budget for this current year, based on the village and the remapping, that will likely show a slight deficit, but it's only an accounting issue based on what came through at the end of last fiscal year, correct? So there won't be a surprise, but just want to highlight it. So it's not a change in the outlook, but just the accounting.
Exactly. That additional revenue, we'll receive it, but as we have here an assignment prepared to pay that out almost immediately. And we purposely did that out of reserve as opposed to our budget because we want to keep our budget picture clean as opposed to being maybe artificially muddied by that one-off exception.
I need to know, because I can't imagine where it would go. Where is the Tamascal Science Room going to be put?
The Tamascal Science Room is actually going to be placed in the current Tamascal Science Room location.
It's a remodel.
Okay.
Yeah, it's nothing new. It's going to just be remodeled, much like the 2 classrooms at Redwood that will occur, and also San Andreas. A lot of that will happen over breaks, Thanksgiving week break, holiday break, spring break, summer. Lars and our Director of Maintenance and Operations meet frequently in planning tedious details to make that go as smooth as possible.
Well, nice job to the accounting office putting this together. I thought it's very informative, so thank you. And it's always pleasant when we under budget the revenue.
I would agree.
Also, just clarification, I know we talk about a structural deficit and how it changed. We're still talking about something that's in a margin of error. I mean, it started out as being less than 3%, and now it's 1%. So big picture, looking at trends, it's still something to track, but I sometimes get concerned the way we go into the weeds and we count every penny, and yet we still have to know that there are these swings, and bringing it down. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Bringing it down to a 3% spend structural deficit. Now we find out it's closer to 1% is pretty on target with trying to change the slope and to rebuild. And I also want to be clear that the budget we're in now, the 1920, it didn't show a structural deficit. I didn't think it was the next year. So when you say this year, you're talking about the 1920.
Correct. So
right.
This year, the 1920
budget
and the multi-year projections.
Right.
Literally nothing has changed one bit as a result of this.
Right. So that has not changed. So we're not even though, having said it still was low last year, this year it's still there. You don't show any deficit spending the year we're currently in, 1920.
Correct. We're showing the operating surplus of roughly $200,000 we showed in June is exactly our expectation.
Okay.
Right
I just
now.
wanted to make that clear. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
Could I also want to reiterate thank you very much to the staff, and to remind people that the Corbett didn't build the budget that we're doing the unaudited actuals on. So I think moving forward, like Corbett has built this year's budget. So I a lot of confidence moving forward in having super accurate numbers.
Can I ask for a motion? No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to ask for public comment. Right, got myself right when I started to say it that time.
Hi, Mimi Willard from Kentfield.
Yeah. Okay.
I know you're not required by law to use the unaudited results to alter your projections for the current and future years. That said, you did have a couple of positives that, if I understood correctly, are ongoing. $250,000 from the net effect of the remapping of the Corte Madera Mall, and also $380,000 from the parcel tax audit. So I'm assuming that you're going to add those in and true that up when we have the first interim. At least I hope so. Thank you.
Can I ask for a motion to approve the unaudited actuals?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Pass. Thank you. Okay, the next item is take action on the Gann Resolution number 19-5.
What's also an annual tradition at every school district in the state of California is looking at a Gann Amendment. Just a little bit of background, and this has been in place in all public school districts and I believe all public entities since 1979, when Proposition 4 was passed by the state of California. That was called, aka the Gann Amendment, after Paul Gann, who advocated and successfully had the state pass this. Basically, if you look at the resolution, the "and be it further resolved" line is basically stating that our expenditures as a public entity not outpacing the growth of revenues coming in. That is a very simplified version of it, but that's what we're basically asking the board to consider resolving. That I am recommending that no, indeed, for the 2018-19 school year, the year that just passed, and the current year moving forward, we did not and do not predict we will exceed the limitations stated in the Gann limit. It's a very simplified version of that, but I know many of you have heard this in your various roles for many years.
Any comment, question? Student trustees, any comment, question? Okay. Is there any public comment on this agenda item? Okay. Can I please ask for a motion to take action on the Gann Resolution number 19-5?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a roll call vote.
Ms. Lowengarten? Aye. Ms. Ronick?
Aye.
Mr. Oppenheim?
Aye.
Ms. Harlander?
Aye, thank you, that passed. Now we'll move on to an item that we discussed last time, and thank you, Corbett. We'll be discussing the global studies, Tahiti and Belize field trips.
Great. Thank you. As you mentioned, this is a follow-up agenda item. Actually, the next two are related to that. So at the last board meeting, we discussed two specific field trips that we have, a trip to Belize and a trip to Tahiti. And we identified that past practice of approving these trips had not followed our board policies. So we talked about the issues at play at that, surfaced that, and the board gave some direction to do some follow-up. So I'm here to present that follow-up and discussion. Ideally, hopefully we can get some guidance from the board or your preference, but I want to be clear, we're not asking for formal approval, but more of direction on next steps, how to best resolve the situation we're in. So a couple items I just want to highlight. The board asked me to look into the cost of trip insurance to mitigate any potential exposure for that, for the two trips. So I do have some figures that came in on Friday. The total cost of the trip insurance for both trips combined is roughly $8,500. So when you spread that across the roughly 41 families that are currently planning on attending, that's roughly $211 per family. And as the board shared last meeting, our two staff people on point are planning, given direction from the board, to ask the families to contribute towards that. So that's one item. The second item is a updated and specific quote-unquote super waiver that is more specific to the activities that pertain to these two different trips, and recommendations on best practice for rules to make sure that the family is truly notified specifically, as opposed to more generic super waiver we had in the past, what would occur. So working closely with Mike Levinson, who's the point person for the Belize trip, and Madam Tahir Rosenthal-Cox at Drake, we worked to provide a draft of the specific super waivers attached to this agenda item, and they were thoroughly vetted and provided from feedback from our attorneys at DWK we've worked with on field trip matters in the past. And then thirdly, confirmation or clarification on the student supervision ratio of 10-to-1. I know the board mentioned that while we passed a change our board policy from a 10-to-1 ratio to a 12-to-1 ratio in the spring, it was suggested that might this be a case where we should go back to the 10-to-1 ratio. I just want to clarify that with the board. For the Tahiti trip, Ms. Rosenthal-Cox already had 20 students who were planning on attending. So even with that shift, there would be still the 10-to-1 ratio. The two chaperones that were intending on going still will go. They also, one has already completed her lifeguard certification this past weekend. One piece I want to highlight and just make sure, to be honest with you, I'm not sure if I brought up last meeting or not. For the Belize trip, we currently have 21 students have signed up for the trip. And that was based on Mike Levinson's guidance that we were operating under the 12-to-1 ratio in the spring. So one thing I want to bring forward is just to get clarification from. A third chaperone, if we should decide to even approve the trip, but also get guidance on the ratios, would be additional costs of $4,100 additional cost, which relates to the 21 students, roughly $195 additional per student. I know we have another, lastly, and I'll pause for clarifying questions. We have another agenda item following this, which is a potential proposal to change the board policy. That came from guidance from a legal counsel as well. The recommendation is, while we may very much not want to make this change permanent, but if we want to make a change to policy now to make sure that any actions we take align to our board policy, our attorney from DWK felt like there were some reasonable, easier changes to be made. So that is what we'll be talking about the next agenda item. Should the board want to proceed, we have a vehicle to make sure we're operating within our board policy potentially for these two trips. That's all I have.
I have a question about the insurance.
Sure.
And I apologize, I just thought of this now. Something we actually talked about last year at some point, and I can't remember if you were at the meeting or not. but it was the concern that we not rely on chaperones or teachers to handle translation as interpreters between medical doctors and a student's family here in the United States. That sort of guidance that sometimes you can get through, it's like I can't remember what you call it, but it's more than travel insurance. And at that time, it's not, I know it's not overly expensive, and I recall being told that our insurance, I think it changed so that sort of support would be offered. If you don't know now, again, this can be a follow-up item, but I think I'd be more curious about just some of the high-level coverage that the insurance involves, not just, the liability, but the actual support for a student and a family here home if a student were to be injured.
Sure.
Do you have any of that information by chance?
I have some not related to specifically translation services. I wasn't, I don't believe I was at the board
I
meeting a year
apologize,
ago.
and I was trying to
That's
remember
okay.
who it was we were talking to.
What I do know is working with Keenan, who is our overall insurance carrier for the district, they went out, based on their knowledge, and surveyed insurance carriers that provide this more customized in line with what we're actually doing. So Chubb is the name of the carrier that we're going to be potentially insuring with. I know I did look from the documents and disclosures that they provided as a result of the survey I provided to them specific to these two trips. There's insurance related to if a war breaks out in a certain area, if there's certain, natural disasters, what's the word I'm looking for? Extraction, if there's...
if it's... I know it's common with college students when they often study abroad, and they actually have people on the ground, and they can advise, and they have medical doctors that can look at the case and help advise whether the person needs to be taken to a different hospital. It's that level of... care and information that is provided so that we're not relying on, like I said, one of our teachers trying to figure out where the best physician is or work with a family. I have a hunch it must cover that. It's not expensive. I know that. And
I can look into it.
That would be great. That was something that
came
came to me just now. That if we could confirm that, because that was something I know we talked about. So that would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So I have some questions on this, the information that we asked for you to bring back tonight. So thank you for bringing that information back. You said that we would look to individual students at a rate of about $250 to contribute towards the insurance. My understanding is they're covering the insurance, right? The district is not paying for the insurance. So,
yes.
And I know we might have to use language, but if they can't cover the insurance, there's no trip.
Correct. So,
Was that the guidance?
Right, or there's scholarships sometimes,
Yeah.
and there's
right. But it's not coming out of the general fund.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then you mentioned that there's a lifeguard on the Tahiti trip, but this looking at the description of the Tahiti trip, it sounds like. And because the students are staying with individual families, it sounds like they might be doing swimming activities individually with families and or air flights individually with families and or ferry trips individually with families. So the lifeguard is not going to really serve a purpose for the Tahiti trip. So
there are both common group activities where that would be appropriate and supervised together. But also that was a risk from past practice where students did, with their host families, participate in swimming. So there's the intent of this is to have some specific language prohibiting that, that they are to not do that while with their host families. So that was the direction we took.
Oh, did I misread? So it prohibits it?
I believe it's in the rule.
But the consent release says you will you may be going to natural and man-made pools, going to the beach, ocean, and/or snorkeling in the ocean. Your child may be taking a ferry in the open sea, plane flight to nearby with his or her host family. So I did not get that understanding from the waiver that they were prohibited from non-lifeguard activities.
So
In
those
the water.
activities described, the ferries, that correct, is not outlined with that, but the intention was to communicate there's not to be swimming with the host family in the evenings, for example.
Okay.
So is that a separate document you're referring to then?
It's not in the waiver.
Yeah, not in the waiver. It's a separate document.
Okay, so
Okay.
I'm not seeing it specifically here, but in addition to the informational meetings, having a set of rules that would be associated with that.
Well, right, because we heard a lot at the last meeting of it's always been done this way. The board didn't understand how it's been done. And we were very clear about saying we're not relying on how it's been done in the past. We're making sure it's consistent with our board policy and with the specifically detailed activities that are provided in the waiver so a family can give a knowledgeable consent, right? Because if we don't describe the activities, their consent means nothing in the court of law. And so I was not aware that the intention was for the Tahiti trip not to include any non-lifeguard water activities. And if that's the intent, to prohibit non-lifeguard water activities, I'm not sure it's here.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's in the policy.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we communicate that very clearly to the chaperones and very clearly to every family that hosts a student?
I think the next step would be with the direction of the board to take that feedback, update the waiver to your point to make sure it's aligned with exactly what the direction is from the board, aligned with potentially a new updated policy, and make sure this waiver, what their families are signing off of, is also consistent with what they're being informed of in their informational meetings, conversations along with that, so it's all consistent. So I think we need to, whatever guidance the board provides, update this appropriately.
And that sounds good. And I actually would suggest that we see, because water activities are very dangerous inherently by nature, right? That's why we're discussing this. I would like to see, but I would only insist if the rest of the board agrees, the instructions that are provided to the families about permitted and prohibited activities, particularly around water. And I think the instructions need to be written. I don't trust the oral conveyance of it, especially when practice has been different.
Again, with the board's discretion, I think what we'd probably like to do is, wherever the board guides us, make sure that the waiver is explicitly tied to that and that the written instructions are exactly the same. There's no reason for them to be any different, in my opinion.
Just as a practical matter with this, is the trip going for, is everyone in for the $200 extra for the insurance, or is there any attrition because of that, or is anyone trying to essentially opt out, saying, I'll skip the swimming rather than paying that, because obviously the denominator of students changes, but that $8,000 fee wouldn't change for the insurance?
I think the staff members, Mike Levinson and Tahiti Rosenthal Cox, have been in very frequent communication with me, trying to get a feel for where we're going to be. They're obviously getting questions from families and parents excited about the trip. Wanted to have an informational meeting to talk through all the fun things going forward. Both of them have kind of paused in having those informational meetings to try to make sure they have one meeting where they have all the current information. Obviously, they're on hold until we get direct guidance on whether the trip is even authorized to move forward and be under what conditions. So I'm calling a couple of them tonight just to give them some idea of where we're going to stand so they have some idea of how to move forward. So no, I don't believe Mike and T have spoken explicitly about it, certainly not communally, but they're looking forward to getting some guidance.
And it wouldn't be my recommendation that we offer, and I don't think Chubb would offer individual policies where you can sign on to coverage or not, because they're still being exposed to activities that are water activities that make it inherently dangerous. So it's not going to be you 5 get the insurance policy and you 5 don't get the insurance policy.
And it is all for none, at least how we've set it up is all for one.
Are you there?
I was looking for a clause that I highlighted because I had a question Anyone else have any questions on this particular waiver? Go ahead.
I was just curious if this new waiver would apply to all of the global studies trips. I know at TAM they also go to France, London, and I don't think London would swim, but France and Spain, is this like a new thing for all of them? Or is this just for these two particular trips?
So this is the specific discussion we're talking about are very much related to the swimming activities. So obviously, and there's specific board policy that prohibits some swimming activities where there's been a practice for years of approving that.
Yes.
So that misalignment's the issue we're trying to resolve and make sure everyone's on the same
Okay,
page.
so it's
We're
specific
abiding
to these
by
couple
that.
trips.
So I would, that board policy or whatever update the board provides, we would assume and expect that all field trips, regardless of them saying they've approved swimming or not, are abiding by that.
Makes sense.
I think you're doing it.
Is this only about like overseas trips, or does it also apply to domestic trips? Like if we want to plan a field trip to the beach or something for like a beach cleanup? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's some, the last board, some of the specific language in the board policy is specific to ocean or bay, my term, but saltwater. Again, there's a differentiation there. There are additional supports and supplements and additional safety measures that need to be taken place no matter what, even if it was freshwater kayaking in the local river, but specific to saltwater is a specific prohibition in board policy that we have not been consistently following.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question for Cynthia Ronish. So if I'm looking at this waiver, the last bullet, I have the Drake one, looks like. The Tahiti, yeah. I lost my place again. The last bullet just prior to consent, release, and waiver and indemnity. I'm trying to see what page that's on. It's right there. So the last bullet does state, while one district employee supervisor attending this field trip will be lifeguard certified, then it says explicitly that parents are on notice that there are no certified lifeguards in any public beaches or bodies of water. So what you're suggesting is after that, make it very clear that the district is not authorizing any water activity that does not have a certified lifeguard in attendance. But is it this certified lifeguard, or if the family finds a beach that has a certified lifeguard? That's where I envision questions coming back.
Well, I think it.
I mean,
This needs to be consistent with our policy. Our policy says that they shall not swim in water without a lifeguard present. The practice has been in Tahiti to have, and so the fact that a lifeguard is going on the trip to Tahiti, big deal, right? Because if individual families are still going to take their hosted child on individual trips to beaches and swim, it violates our district policy. So this is great that parents, and this actually clause contradicts the policy, because that clause implies that their children will be engaged in activities on beaches where there are no certificated lifeguards.
That's
our policy prohibits that.
Right, and that's where I'm getting myself confused reading that bullet. Or what is it that we're saying? Are we saying we're sending a district employee that's a certified lifeguard, so they'll be at those beaches? Again, I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree. That's why I'm just saying because you raised an interesting point, and then if we're clear that students can only swim where there's a certified lifeguard, earlier it sounded like we were saying you can't swim outside of the group activities when you're alone with your parents. But if the parents are going to a beach with a certified lifeguard, are we going to prohibit them from doing so?
No, because that's consistent with the policy. What this says is that there are no, lifeguards aren't a big deal in Tahiti, right?
Okay.
So standards that we have in our policy are not followed as a practice for the Tahitian nation. And so it seems that by taking a lifeguard, they're trying to address the policy, but it won't address the policy if it's individual. The only way it will address the policy is if that lifeguard is with the group of Drake students anytime they swim in the water.
Okay, so I wasn't clear that in Tahiti there's absolutely no certified lifeguards on any beaches, and I guess that was my question.
I think the point of that bullet is to inform parents that while their district is sending a lifeguard for the organized swims, right? And that the idea would be that there is no swimming allowed beyond that.
That doesn't say it.
And,
That's why I'm confused.
no, I understand that, but let me finish.
Okay.
But the idea is that that we would prohibit swimming outside of those group activities. And this is to let parents know that there are no lifeguards on any other beaches,
Okay.
right? So it's sort of reinforcing the idea of why we would not allow swimming outside of those group activities.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, but it does not specifically say that.
No,
That's what I'm
I
saying. This
understand,
waiver
I
is not
understand.
consistent with policy.
We understand, we got that direction.
Yeah.
I'm taking feedback from the board that would be an update to bring forward.
Yeah, the amount of discussion shows that we were getting confused, so that'd be helpful. Thank you.
I just want to thank Corbett. He has
Yes, thank
spent an enormous amount of his time on getting this information and gathering it and working with our attorneys. Clearly, the Global Studies program has been very highly valued in this district, and we appreciate the opportunities it provides some of our students. But this has been I don't think people understand what an enormous lift this has been for him to get all this information, to make all these changes, and to take all the time. So thank you very much.
So what guidance are we giving? Because I'm, personally, I need to see a more accurate waiver that spells it out, and then a set of instructions that will be given to the families. But I imagine that we have to give some guidance to the at least the Tahiti trips, especially because Tahitian students are here, so that they can have the meetings. So do we give direction to that we're approving these trips with the updated waiver and instructions, or do we wait for the waiver and instructions to come back? I'm not clear.
What is the timeline when is the drop dead date that, it sounds like we're holding things up.
Yeah.
And so that people want some direction, and I like what you were alluding to, is that we can work out the specifics and make sure it's abundantly clear, so that the waiver and the policy is consistent, but let the families know that we expect to approve the field trips, but there will be additional criteria that will mean that their students will not swim anywhere that there's not a certified lifeguard. And because where they're going, there are no certified lifeguards, so that means they will only swim when the certified lifeguard that we send with them is with them as a group. I mean, and that there will be an additional cost for insurance that's in a ballpark range, but the district and the board is working out the details to make sure that it's abundantly clear. And
If I may?
yes.
Yes, so I believe we're not asking for formal approval of these trips, but general guidance, which I hear you are trying to articulate. And I think what I heard from, I believe the board, is that these super waivers, I think, specific to the TD trip, but we have an additional bullet point that I can take some feedback on, propose a draft to our attorneys, have them also provide feedback on that. For both super waivers, the updated one for Tahiti, the current Belize one, unless there's any further feedback, we can use that as the basis document to derive our very explicit rules and expectations that will be physically handed on paper to our families at those informational meetings. So I believe if you're able to provide that guidance to move forward under these conditions to be brought back either sooner or at the time of the formal approval of these field trips, likely sooner. My recommendation is both Tahia with Tahiti, Mike with Belize. They would like to tie this up and move forward and get guidance, but obviously it's at your discretion. The only last piece of guidance I need some clarity from is specific to the Belize trip. I want to highlight we do use a company that's been vetted. They do provide additional levels of supervision, and we outsource some of our liability. But it would be helpful to have some guidance on the board's direction on the supervision ratio, given we have 21 students who have committed to that throughout the spring, made deposits, hoping to attend, exciting to attend. But if we want to move forward under the 10-to-1 ratio, that changes the dollar amounts to pay for that third chaperone, the request along with the trip insurance out to his family. So that's making the math work. We're clear that the families will be paying for it. Just the ratio piece is a missing variable in that math.
And for your own sanity, I think it might be good to get a sense from the teachers and from those who are likely to participate if they'll stay in it, because given the restrictions in terms of activities, the sense is there's not a ton of flexibility here in terms of what the policy will be, and so would all the students still go ahead with both the added costs and the restrictions?
What did you mean by that? You guys sense there's not a ton of flexibility here on what the policy will be? What part of the policy are you referring to?
I'm meaning that I think everyone's been very clear in terms of what the expectation for the policy will be.
But what are you talking about? Swimming? Or are you talking about ratio?
Mostly the swimming.
Okay, because there's two different parts of the policy: the
Understood.
swimming activities, and then increasing the ratio to or decreasing the ratio to 10-1 for swimming activities, which is what has been in the policy. So I want to make sure that we're not making light of that, and by referring to it, lack of flexibility as opposed to attention to safety.
I think that's what he was saying. I took it that way, just for clarity, that you were saying we're,
very clear in terms
yeah.
of what the expectation is for the policy.
What I was referencing, it was the ratios of the 12-1 versus 10-1 ratio. As we changed the ratio from 10-1 to 12-1 in the spring. That was the guidance that staff were staffing these field trips on at that time. I'm just alluding to there's discussion at the last board meeting about potentially for these trips considering them under the 10-1 ratio. So that 12-1, 10-1 is where I'm looking for some guidance, because that depends on the number of chaperones, hence the cost, hence the ask to families.
But Corbett, in terms of the chaperones, you've got 2 chaperones going from the U.S.
For both trips confirmed.
But I'm just talking about the 21 kids, the students that are going. So for the Belize trip,
Correct.
and they will be met and supervised in addition by some of the company, the
Correct.
Chubb company.
Not Chubb, it's the company
Oh, sorry, yeah.
that we consult with. That's a professional field trip.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
Yep.
I'm confusing the two.
And they provide additional support, additional support within the water activities there.
So then there's actually a higher or lower ratio of students
Safer ratio.
Safer ratio, indeed.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
And so so I think you have gotten direction when it comes to the super waiver and the waiver and the limitations of the activities, and to expect a greater fee for insurance. But now you would like clear direction on the Belize trip, exactly what you were just referring to, whether we will ask for a higher ratio of chaperone to student.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Above the 12-1 that there is now.
Correct.
I'm getting my ratios mixed up. Actually, a lower ratio, closer to a 10-1 ratio on that trip. And this is aside from the swimming activities. This is just the overall trip of
Correct.
what we talked about before. I personally don't have a concern about that. I'm really focused on the swimming based on what was described to us last time, and the fact that there is an outside company. So I do not have a concern about the 12-1 on that particular trip, and I'll open up if any other board members have a concern or not.
But wait, there's more.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you,
Nice to
student
have you back
trustees.
again.
The numbers. Good night, everyone.
Pardon me? Yep. So I want to get a sense, I want to make sure I understand your point. I don't have an issue with the 12-1 on this trip.
Well, it's actually not 12-1. It's
I'm getting so
10.1 to 1.
Okay, so
I'm
okay,
sorry.
so I'm
10
going
and
to
a half.
demand that we have consistency with our policy And for my personal request, that we have our policy says for swimming field trips, the ratio of adult chaperones to students shall be at least 1 to 10. Are we defining the outfit that we use in Belize and that you are saying is always with the extra adults that are always going to be with our students during any swimming activity in Belize? Are they defined as chaperones? Or do we define chaperones as TAM district employees or parents, so people that we send from our district? How do we define chaperones?
My understanding is that it has been adults, our staff employees. I don't know, to be completely honest with you, if that's a consistent interpretation over time.
And maybe I need clarification on how we define a swimming field trip. I do not consider going on a global study trip where part of the activity could be swimming or is swimming. I don't think of that as a swimming field trip. It's a field trip that they do many, many activities throughout their day. And so that's where I think my disconnect is. I just don't. It's one of the activities. So during that activity, they better have a high supervision, and that's where we get to the at least 10 to 1, but on top of that, a certified lifeguard and the other parameters that we've discussed. But if they,
It's Mike Levinson, for what it's worth, who's gone on this trip for 2 years. It doesn't delineate the definition of a chaperone question. His conversation is that when we're in the water, it's 4 to 1, if not 3 to 1, with the 2 staff members and additional members of this company that we contract with, have insurance coverage with as well.
Okay, so I don't. And the one asking the questions is the one that's grew up reading documents. So the document we're looking at is district-sponsored trip. Are these global studies trips district-sponsored trips?
Yes.
Okay. In that document, it has a section regarding to swimming activities. And that section says on page 6, no swimming or wading shall be allowed on trips unless planned and approved in advance. The following activities, and then the following, the principal shall ensure the following precautions are taken. And in that is the ratio of adult chaperones to students. So that's the whole thing that we've been looking at. Now we can add language that says if it's a global studies field trip and we've contracted with a adequately insured outfit that is also providing adults during the water activities, then we can default to the 12 to 1 ratio for for other global studies trips. But the document that we're looking at, we can't just wish away the document.
I don't think anyone is suggesting that.
Okay, but
I'm just trying to get to the essence of what we agree to, and I'm saying here's how I would look at it. Then I would look at our policy and say, well, now that I look at the policy, I don't think the policy is clear. That's the point I was trying to make.
But I'm saying it's here. This is the policy that was attached to review for tonight with the red line.
And I'm making a point now that I don't think I agree with the policy, the way it's written. That's all the point I'm trying to make.
And I don't know that Cynthia's saying that she agrees or disagrees with the policy. The way I'm hearing you, Cynthia, so correct me if I'm misunderstanding you, but it's that we're fine if we've got 4 to 1 ratio students to an adult supervisor, an adult caretaker, chaperone, wherether it be someone that came from the district or someone that is provided via the contracted agency that we're working with in wherever we are. That's a good thing. That's a good ratio. That's safe. We need to just make sure that the language doesn't say the 10 to 1, 10 students to 1 chaperone, i.e. the chaperone coming from the district. Because I think, Cynthia, am I correct in understanding that you're fine if it's, if there is indeed 4 students to 1, if the ratio becomes much safer as a result of using the contracted agency, but we just need to make sure that it's clearly spelled out.
Yes, which is what I was trying to say. And so because in June, we said because of expense and all of that the ratio for adult chaperones to students is 12 to 1. We agreed in that increase. Then we saw the swimming policy and the concerns around this. And the swimming policy that the district follows says 10 to 1. That's why I asked, what's our definition of adult chaperone? Because I don't think we just bend it and say, oh, we have 21, so it's okay because it's only one over. Because devil's advocate, the next person comes, so we only have 23. It's only 3 over, but we're all really good swimmers and all of that. And then you've moved away from the ratio. So that's why I went to the section, to the swimming section for all district-sponsored trips, and we need to redefine the language in Section 5. The ratio of adult chaperones to students shall be at least 1 to 10, and then define adult chaperone. An adult chaperone is someone sent by the district, right? So either a district employee, I assume are the ones that go, or a member of a, adequately, right, I don't know, insured, certificated outfit that the district contracts with, for example, and give an example of the firm that we use in Belize. And if we do that, then I'm perfectly willing to, to agree that 2 chaperones for the 21 people going to Belize is sufficient. But I don't think it's insignificant that we've been running field trips that are inconsistent with our swimming guidelines.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to clear up, and that's why we're trying to spell out the language. So, and that's why I was referring to the policy.
And I think I don't think any of us are disagreeing, and that's why I'm getting a little frustrated. I think all I was trying to do was to say my opinion, to give him verbal, that as a board direction, to be able to say to them that, no, we're good with 12. And I was trying to describe why I felt comfortable with 12, knowing that there was going to be more supervision during swimming and some of the other language. But the whole idea of trying to make the waiver consistent with the board policy, that's going to take some more work to be done, and that's not what I was trying to accomplish right here. So that's what. Do you still need that, or don't you? I think I'm getting confused.
I think I've got it. I think I have it.
I mean,
I understand.
No, do you need? Did I misunderstand you? I thought you wanted direction from the board whether you could tell that trip that they needed another chaperone or not.
My understanding is that trip is going to be fine with 2 chaperones from the district. We need to clarify our board policy to indicate that if we have 2 chaperones and an adult from a contracted agency that will also be supervising water activities, that as long as we have the ratio of adult supervision during swimming activities at least at 10 to 1, I think we need to clarify the word chaperone and maybe shift it to adult supervision during water activities. I think that will help clarify. I think we also need some language in there around who's an adult that we would trust. That's why I think an agent of the contracted company, and that will, during those water activities, we will be in compliance with the 10 to 1.
If I could add to that, I think I've got the guidance as well. I think the proposed updated board policy could be brought back with the additions that you just described. We can bring that back potentially at the next board meeting. If the board approves, we have established that policy. That buys time for me to work on the other items we talked about, and then to ultimately bring back those 2 field trips for formal approval under our updated board policy.
And if I could also, if you're in contact with the Global Studies Program or the head of the Global Studies Program, people may get frustrated with the discussion that we've had here. It is only out of concern for the students that we have had this discussion, and it is our absolute duty to protect students if this is a district-sponsored field trip, which is what we got in some of the discussion about, because you said some of the swimming activities you didn't view as a field trip, but it's a district-sponsored field trip.
I'm sorry, I didn't say that, and I must not be very clear. I'm really sorry.
Okay,
I
then I misinterpreted
absolutely
and misheard.
Never said that.
Okay.
Or meant to imply that.
And so if you can convey to them that we take this very seriously, and I think it's good that we are cleaning up our practice to make sure it's consistent with policy that adequately protects our students when they go on water activity trips.
I can certainly do that on behalf of the board. I can also share it's Tuesday, multiple conversations this week and last week that there's already an understanding of that and realizing we're doing what's best for students and for our district, and that this is all worthwhile. And they appreciate your flexibility to even consider that. So I can share that on their behalf right now.
Yeah, and thank you also for, I know you've been putting a lot of work into this and really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's my job. Thank you. I'm clear in the direction from the board. So
Okay.
I have what I need.
Anybody else? No? Okay.
Public comment? Leslie?
Is there any public comment? Okay, thank you, Corbett.
You're welcome.
Sorry, I've lost my place. You'll have to give me one
It's
moment.
the AR.
14E. Oh,
Okay,
14D.
D, 14D, thank
Yeah.
you. So now we'll take action on revision to admin record district-sponsored trips. Well,
We might table that.
we might
Yeah.
table that. I think
We're gonna
we kind of went through
yeah.
there, didn't we?
We
That
did.
was where we were.
Can I just ask, though, on, so page 3, they refer to not consuming, teachers and chaperones shall not consume alcoholic beverages or use controlled substances.
What number was, I'm sorry, Karen, I
It's
just pulled it
page
up.
3.
Page 3, gotcha.
It just says, chaperones, it's actually defining chaperones, will be 21 years of age or older shall, I think it's the third paragraph. Teachers and chaperones shall not consume alcoholic beverages or use controlled substances. Should smoking or vaping or something like that be included? I'd like to see it included, given the robust conversations that are going on around that, please.
I think that's a good addition.
That's the direction of the board. I'd be more than willing to include that in my next update.
I agree. Do you, Dan?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
So on page 6, these aren't numbered. Why we should have these sections numbered? But anyway, it's in the second number 2 on page 6. So under the principal shall ensure the following precautions have been taken.
I'm there.
And number 2, it says swimming facilities, including backyard pools, must be inspected or reviewed by the principal and the teacher before the trip is scheduled. So how the or reviewed seems like it was added by Keenan or our attorneys. So how is the principal reviewing? What does the principal do to currently review? Is the principal even involved in these global studies trips?
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
They ultimately sign off on the field trip request form before it comes to me to considerations. So yes, they do. I think the intent of this proposed change is that while they may inspect them, there may be times where they're not physically expecting them, but they're reviewing the circumstances and the information and authorizing that is the intent of that.
And our principals are doing that?
That's been my experience. I have as a principal here.
And then we're going to add language to section 5 there.
Yep, I have those notes. One thing it also shares that while certainly open to any feedback for now, this is indeed your policy, Dr. Chopi and I have talked about how we might very well bring this forward for a comprehensive look as well. So obviously there might be further opportunities to review this.
Part of the challenge too is in reading this, there's a bit of a blend, it seems, between a day field trip to Stinson Beach, for instance, versus a global field trip. And so that's where it might be helpful too. We have our parameters. That's what I was trying to say before. We have parameters for swimming, but then we have parameters for all the non-swimming activities in terms of ratios. And so it might, and maybe when we look at it again, you'll be able to tell, but it might be good to have a section that has more specificity for the global field trip because they're beyond, there's a much bigger deal, so.
I agree. This policy has obviously grown over time and layers have added to it, but the types of field trips have changed dramatically over the decades. So I feel like there could be an opportunity to take a holistic global look at this policy And to what Dr. Topia was saying earlier, really look at how the role of field trips, what's the educational value
Right,
of them,
right.
reflected to our mission and vision of the district,
Mhm.
our equity values, how might that policy support, a new policy support that?
Good. Well, thank you very much. I know it's been a lot of work. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item, and we are down to the bond refinancing.
Great. So I'm going to make an introduction. I'm going to introduce our financial advisor from the firm Kegent, Chet Wang, who's here with us this evening. But just a quick reminder, for the past two board meetings, we've been previewing and discussing the potential to refund our district's existing bonds that we had. Again, we are not considering a new bond campaign. This is our existing bonds. And given the global bond interest rate markets, this is an opportunity that we could save the community taxpayers who pays our bonds upwards of greater than potentially $3 million on current interest rate markets and Kegent's analysis. So we've been previewing that, talking about it. Again, I'm going to bring Chet up in a moment. He will share very similar information we've talked about, but this is the night where potentially you'll be asked to consider a resolution. It's attached 19-4, and various legal documents have been fully vetted by our bond counsel, the legal firm of ORC. We have some representatives here as well to speak to that. But tonight is the night where you'll be asked to consider authorizing staff to pursue bond refunding under the terms and conditions outlined here. And so unless there's any questions for me, I'd like to introduce Mr. Chet Wang from Kegent, who would like to speak and present.
Good evening, board members, Dr. Topier. As Mr. Elson mentioned, tonight's presentation will cover some of the information that he previously touched on the August 27th meeting, and before the board this evening, if you wish to pursue this refinancing, are legal documents which Lauren Herrera from ORIC will be able to answer. So we're taking a look at two series of existing district bonds, and these are the district's 2010 and 2011 refinancing bonds. And because interest rates have come down so considerably over the last few months, there's an opportunity to refinance these bonds for taxpayer savings. And similar to refinancing a mortgage, we're simply paying off higher rate bonds with lower rate bonds. And what's different is we're able to do this without any extension of the original financing terms. And we got two potential structures that are before the board for consideration. One is to do them all on a taxable basis, and another is to do what's called a delayed delivery, where we don't close the financing, but we're able to do it on a tax-exempt basis. All costs of financing, which are estimated to be about $295,000, are paid out of bond proceeds, and all the savings figures that you'll see reflect the payment of all those costs. So just a quick snapshot of interest rates. If we take a look at the chart to the right, this represents interest rates going back to 2015. And you can see over the last year, since about August, September 2018, interest rates have fell pretty precipitously from about 4.3% down to about 3%, so about 1.3% of a differential. That's caused in large part to some of the economic uncertainty that's happening globally, weakness in European economies, uncertainties around Brexit, Iran, Hong Kong, Argentina. Primarily, you're reading about the trade war with China, and also the Fed had cut their rates in July, at the end of July, and we're potentially looking at 1, 2, or 3 more additional cuts in September and December, end of this calendar year. Historically, the chart to the left, we are pretty much at historic lows. The only time that rates have been lower was a short period of time in 2016. Now, as we're considering taxable bonds, U.S. Treasury bonds are taxable, so here's a snapshot of where taxable rates are looking. The purple and orange bars represent long-term taxable, the 10-year and the 30-year treasuries. Those have also come down over the last calendar year. And the short-term rates, the 3-month and the 1-year treasuries, have risen in rates. And so you've probably read about an inverted yield curve where short-term rates are higher than long-term rates. Smarter minds than mine might say that that portends a recession, but what it does is it's a unique opportunity to have a lower cost of borrowing for long-term bonds, yet a higher reinvestment rate when you deposit monies in a short-term escrow fund. And I'll touch on that in just a moment. So whenever we issue a municipal bond financing, similar to when you go out for a mortgage, you get a credit rating. Since we're issuing a loan on the bond side of things, we also get a credit rating. And the district is rated on 4 major criteria: 30% local economy, 30% your district finances, 20% district management, and 20% district debt. Now, the district historically only had the highest AAA rating from Standard & Poor's. The last time that was looked at was 5 years ago, in October in 2014. The environment was very different 5 years ago, so we made a very strategic move to go with a Moody's rating so that we're getting a fresh look as to where the district is today, as opposed to a comparison of where you may have been 4 or 5 years ago. So we made a presentation to Moody's in San Francisco with Dr. Topier and Mr. Elson. We covered about 40 pages of material touching on the district's strengths in the local economy, the housing in the area, your basic aid status, the recognitions of your high schools, the strong community support on your foundations and parcel taxes. So that all boded very well, and we'll be hearing tomorrow morning as to where Moody's will come back as far as their rating result. Now, actually on page 5, I'll turn it over to Lauren Herrera. We've summarized on one page the hundreds of pages of documents in front of you this evening.
Good evening. My name is Lauren Herrera. I'm with Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe and serve as the district's bond counsel. So just to kind of quickly walk through the documents that are in front of you. The most important of these is the authorizing resolution. It does a couple of major things. It approves the issuance of the refunding bonds, and it also sets forth a couple of issuance parameters. So it limits the amount of bonds that can be sold. It limits the compensation that the underwriter, the bank that's initially purchasing the bond, can be paid. It also ensures that there's a sufficient floor of savings that's achieved when we refinance. So we set that at 3% savings. If on the day of pricing we're not able to garner that much savings, we won't move forward because we'll have determined that it's not in the district's best interest because they won't be netting enough savings to taxpayers. In addition to that, it authorizes the district administration to ultimately sign the contracts, that's the balance of the documents that are before you, and make a decision in concert with us and with the financial advisor on the day of pricing about whether to sell the bonds to the underwriter. Finally, it authorizes the form of the remaining bond documents that are before you, and I can quickly explain each of those. The preliminary official statement is an offering document. It operates much like a prospectus to investors, and it includes all of the relevant financial and operating information of the district. This is the most important one that's before you in the sense that securities law mandates that a governing board have an opportunity to review this document prior to moving forward with the sale of bonds. In addition, we have the bond purchase agreement, which is the contract between the district and the underwriting firm for purchasing the bonds. We have a continuing disclosure certificate, which is included as an appendix to the preliminary official statement. And the preliminary official statement is the first set of information that we give to the market, to potential investors. The continuing disclosure certificate sets forth the district's responsibilities to update the market on a regular basis. So that includes providing an annual report that includes district's financials from the last year, but it also, if there's any material event that occurs, if there's a rating upgrade or downgrade, if for whatever reason there was a missed payment on the bonds, the district would just be obligated to inform the market about any of those events. We also have an escrow agreement, and this outlines the Bank of New York Mellon's obligations to pay off the previous series of bonds. So those the new series of bonds will be placed in escrow to ultimately pay off the prior series in the future. And then finally, there's also a paying agent agreement, and that just directs that the flow of funds for the current series of bonds that are being issued. Although primarily that is to say that it's the funds will be received and given to the escrow agent to pay off the bonds and then to pay the financing team for the financing. So with that, I know it's a lot of paper in front of you, a lot of documentation. Happy to answer any questions about any of that you might have. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to Chet to finish off.
Any questions while we take this pause?
No, I think when Chuck continues on some.
Okay, great, thank you.
Now, to the next steps, to the extent the board does approve these refinancing documents, we would receive the credit rating tomorrow, and at that time, the preliminary official statement would be circulated by the underwriters to prospective investors. We'd sell the following week. That could move a day up or a day backwards depending on market conditions or what else is coming to market. And then that's the day when the bonds are sold, that's when your interest rates are locked. And then we potentially have two closings, one that happens 3 weeks after and then one that happens in 2020. I'll explain the difference between the two. One is based on a taxable advance refunding and the other is based on a delayed delivery on a tax-exempt basis. So the IRS has rules with respect to refinancing bonds, and most bonds previously had been sold with what's called a call date or optional redemption. It's one date in the future by which you could pay off those bonds. A refinancing more than 90 days from that date is called a advance refunding, and advance refundings must be done on a taxable basis under IRS rules. If the refinancing is done within 90 days, that could be done on a tax-exempt basis. So the two series of bonds, the existing bonds that we're examining are the 2010 and 2011 refunding bonds. So the 2010 bonds could be refunded either on a taxable advance refunding or the tax-exempt delayed delivery. So with a taxable advance refunding, we'd be able to close the financing in October of 2019. If we delayed the closing until May of 2020, so that we are within 90 days of the August 2020 call date, that could be a current refunding that we could do on a tax-exempt basis. Now, because that closing period is so long, about 8 months, there is a monthly interest rate penalty of about 5 basis points, or 0.05%, each month that's added on top of the tax-exempt rates. And in this current market, that is slightly lower than taxable rates. And investors generally can go up to about 18 months for a delayed closing. Sometimes you could push it to about 20 months or so, but there would be some discovery if you go that far. Now, the 2011 bonds are a little bit more straightforward. Those have a call date in August 1 of 2021. A delayed delivery of that financing would be about 20 months. You might be able to find someone willing to do that, but I think it might be a little bit of a stretch. But again, that, to the extent those had a delayed delivery, you would still have the same 5 basis point penalty per month for a 20-month period. So that might bring the tax-exempt rates slightly above the taxable rates. So here's the first structure that we're taking a look at, which is a taxable refunding of both 2010 and 2011. There's a lot of statistics here, but I'll draw your eyes to the yellow box, which is a combination of taxable of both 2010 and 2011. Total debt service savings of $4.1 million. On a present value basis, that's about $3.8 million. And that present value divided by the bonds that we're refunding is 9.3%. The industry benchmark or the best practices in our industry is anywhere north of 3 to 5%. So you're well within or above that benchmark.
And is this assuming the highest credit rating for Moody's tomorrow?
We actually assumed, we were a little bit more conservative and assumed a slightly lower rating to build in any kind of cushion. Now, with respect to replacing the old bonds, those currently have a combined rate of about 5%, and these new bonds would have a rate of about 2.41%. I actually watched the video on the August 27th. There was a question about the principle of refunded versus refunding. I think this is important to note because at the end of the day, we are refunding $40.7 million of bonds, and your new bonds would have a principal amount of 43.1. That's fairly common where the refunding bonds paying off the old bonds will be different from what you're actually refinancing, whether there's
thank you.
premium generated or discount. And I think one thing that's important to note are a few things. Number one, notwithstanding that increase in principal, that $4.1 million is the net savings of taxpayers. That's reflective of the change in principal amount. That $4.1 million also is reflective of the $295,000 in cost of issuance. So I'll draw your eyes now back to the 2010 taxable refunding. Under taxable rates, this refinancing, if it closed in October of 2019, would have about $2.5 million of debt service savings on a taxable basis. So now let's take a look at the second structure. And the one thing that changes, and I'll just toggle back and forth, you'll see 2011 does not change. Under the tax exempt, what we do is we refinance those with a tax exempt delayed delivery. So if I go back to the prior slide, this closed in October 2019, and it has an interest rate, right, below that 5% of 2.37. On a tax-exempt delayed delivery basis, we closed that in May of 2020. Our savings is a bit higher at $3.1 million, and that's because the tax-exempt rates plus the monthly penalty is about 1.85%. So we do generate about $600,000 of additional savings. The forward does have some risk considerations, and I'll touch on that on the next page. So under option 1, where we issue all the bonds taxable, the pros are there are certain underwriter termination events, such as a rating change of the district, or Mr. Elson mentioned a declaration of war that could happen that gives an underwriter an out. And but those are actual outs, and during this 3-week period, those termination events do apply. Now, with the all taxable bonds, you're closed on October 2019. So there's, come October 2019, the financing is done, the savings are locked, whatever you communicate to your taxpayers is set in stone. The cons are, we've got lower taxpayer savings of about $600,000 because the taxable rates are higher than the tax exempt rates. Now, looking at the combination of the two, the pros are, well, you have $600,000 of higher taxpayer savings. So we were looking at the $4.8 million in taxpayer savings versus $4.2 million. The cons are, well, now our termination period is even longer at 8 months. And to the extent you said, well, we want to look at a tax-exempt delayed delivery for 2011, you'd have a 20-month period. So a pretty long period and with some risk as well. So there might be some uncertainty of the savings message. So if we were to sell the bonds and a termination event occurred that the underwriter decided to execute, you might have some issues unwinding the financing. And additionally, anytime you do a delayed delivery, you are required to update that prospectus, which Lauren touched on, the preliminary offering official statement. That would be updated for your new financials, labor information, and any other material changes. So some additional staff time is required for that. Oops. So with that, the documents are before you. They do authorize both structures and would welcome any questions on the finances. Lauren can answer any questions on the legal side, and would love to hear your thoughts on taxable versus the combination as well.
In terms of delayed delivery, that district then bears the risk if there is anything in terms of choppy markets during that time. And so late 2008, these wouldn't have closed, presumably, right?
If that's potentially true, yes. So let's say that there's certainly counterparty risk in 2008, and that was something that we saw a lot of. So if come 2020, the underwriter that is on these bonds is the counterparty and not in business, there is a risk to the district where the district might have to unwind this financing and go back out, and who knows where the interest rate environment may be in
Right.
2020 or even 2021.
I guess not related to you, but in terms of parcel tax and other things, it sort of murkies everything in terms of just, it wouldn't be done at that
Right,
point
right.
if it's delayed and such.
I agree with you.
And it's part of the story.
Yeah, or, exactly.
Well, I think it, and with the district bearing the risk and the message around, spending funds wisely for the community that's necessary to a parcel tax, if we go forward with that, I think it's worth it to lock it, even though it's worth less, worth it to lock it up earlier. Are people?
Well, and to understand too, while there is an additional $640,000 savings.
Right.
And I know it's not going to come anywhere near that, but there will be other expenses potentially through staff.
That's right, staff time. to
Staff time,
update.
exactly, and perhaps having to go, and you mentioned that we might have to go through another rating, potentially?
Not another rating.
Or a
but-
review?
But to the extent that your rating changes, that would potentially be a termination event on the underwriter side. So there is some risk there.
Got it.
To consider.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I too agree with locking it in sooner.
Dan?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Any other discussion before I open it up to public comment? Because we'll do that before we take a motion.
I guess I'd just say, and part of the reason why rates are so low at this point is because markets aren't calm and there's concern out there. And so to take advantage of that, but then delay the closing, I'd say, I don't know that that's
Right, it's
to our
too,
advantage.
wait, yeah, it seems like taking a risk that way. Great, so what we'll do is we're going to take public comment, and then we'll come back for the motion, so be one moment. Do we have any, depends on if we have public comment. Do we have any public comment on this agenda item? No?
I think the board is wise to be thinking about, whether you want the risk of that delayed closing. I do think it's definitely complicated by the fact that you're trying to do your parcel tax in March, because we're not for that, it might kind of tilt the balance in favor of wanting to go for the $600,000 in potential savings, but failure of the parcel tax might be a termination event. So, just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Any other comment? Okay, I'll bring it back to the board in that case. Any other clarification before I ask for a motion? Okay, can I please ask for a motion then to pass Resolution 19-4, authorizing the issuance and sale of refunding existing bonds of the district and approval of forms authorizing the execution of necessary documents and related actions?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. This is a roll call vote, Mary.
Ms. Mocha?
Aye.
Ms. Bronick?
Aye.
Mr. Oppenheim?
Aye.
And Ms. Harlander?
Aye. Thank you. That passed. And thank you very much for coming this evening and presenting. It's very clearful.
Appreciate it. Talk to you next week.
Okay, the next agenda item, I believe, is you again, Corbett?
Oh, I've got my partner in crime for this one, too.
Oh, it's two of you. Okay. Discussion of potential parcel tax renewal.
Mary, if you would, pull up the slide deck, please. Thank you. Great. So obviously, at last board meeting, as a reminder, we had Godby Research and TBWB, I have trouble with that acronym, provide an update of the community polling that was done. And based on that discussion, I want to hold a discussion here with the board and the community to talk about our potential renewal process. So I'm going to provide a quick couple of reminders about our parcel tax current status, and then Dr. Tope is going to speak about potential discussions. So this is a timeline we've seen since May of 2019, last spring. There's a few edits from this just based on the conversation we had last board meeting. So nothing here. This shows, again, a potential March 3rd, 2020 parcel tax election. As a quick reminder to that, we do have a December 6th legal deadline that would be required to have previous board action passing a potential resolution to place a parcel tax measure on the ballot. Obviously, we have a Thanksgiving holiday, so prior to that, November 19th is our last regular board meeting where a potential resolution could be brought forward to the board and potentially approved with all the legal requirements required by that. Obviously, it's September 10th, so we have some time between now and November to have conversations at the board level and with the community. Quick reminders, again, I know you have this memorized by heart by now, but some reminders of our existing parcel tax details. Combined, the original, if you will, and the supplemental combined provide $16.8 million annually. Relatively, that's roughly 17% of our annual budget. It is significant. Combined with our property tax levels, we are truly a community-funded school district, and that doesn't even mention the tremendous foundation support. Both of the parcel taxes, again, are set to expire simultaneously in June of 2022. And the fourth bullet just provides some of the ballot measure language of what that parcel tax provides in terms of services, in terms of attracting and retaining high-quality teachers, programming, and instruction. So just quick reminders of some of the services that provides. If the parcel tax expires without a renewal, obviously if it provides $68.8 million of revenue, we would not have that, therefore we would need to make the similar cuts to balance our budget. That goes without saying. Us being a school district, seems like a long time ago at the unaudited actuals, between 80 and 88% of our expenses are people. So that obviously that would have to have some impact on staffing levels. If the parcel tax is renewed at the existing rate, our current rates, without an increase, and even after the ongoing $5.8 million of expenditure reductions, the 2.8 made this past spring, in addition to the 2.9 made the previous year, the district would still, we're estimating in our more internal 5-year multi-year projection to have ongoing operating deficits of $3 million, 3.8, growing to 6, and $6.7 million. Those are estimates. But those are current estimates based on reasonable assumptions based on experience both internally and using MCOE's advice and the Department of Finance for property tax predictions. Obviously, we polled the community on a $190 potential increase. Dr. Tope will speak to that in a moment. But a $190 increase beyond our current levels would generate roughly an additional $6 million annually. If we go out in March of 2020, that $6 million would be immediately impactful for the 2020-21 school year, fiscal year. So that's sooner. That would obviously prevent any significant cuts or further significant cuts to programming and staffing. Does this have the laser point on it, Mary? It does. I just want to highlight something that the $6 million annually, that's in 2020-21 dollars, whereas these operating deficits are in future dollars. So it's assumed that much like our current parcel taxes have a 3% annual inflator to keep up with the reasonable cost of inflation, This $6 million and this $6.7 million are the same dollars, just in different year of dollars. That includes the 3% inflator. So the math behind this was to have a potentially balanced budget with reasonable assumptions on enrollment, property taxes, everything that we have reasonable assumptions for, to have a balanced budget in 5 years. Therefore, the $6 million, if it brought in sooner, would provide a surplus. These operating deficits would turn into surpluses, and the strategy behind that would to bring our reserve levels in compliance with our stated board policy of a target reserve, and maybe in a little bit higher. So with that, I want to hand it over to Dr. Topier.
The potential parcel tax renewal, some of the structure that we were talking about or have been discussing at the board level is both term and amount. So the term is the 10-year term. What you see up here is the rationale. Because we have a reasonable ability to predict enrollment within that 10-year time frame, and also because we know that markets naturally expand and contract, and that these cycles are roughly 7 to 10 years. So the idea of 10 years is about a length of time that we think is reasonable for us to be able to predict and budget based on that, and as well as that the community seemed receptive to the 10-year in the polling. So the amount that we discussed was the 190. So the 190 was, Corbett kind of hit on it a bit ago, but it was derived from a fairly lengthy budget analysis and a deeper projection beyond our required 3 years. This was a number that was derived from what would it take at our current expenditures after the $5.8 million of cuts to be balanced in 5 years, to ensure that we would have a balanced budget, we would be able to maintain the level of programming we have now, that we would be able to meet the expectations of the community as far as robust course offerings and programming, and be the district that the community really wants us to be. That was how we derived that 190. So it wasn't just some number just below 200. It was actually derived thoughtfully through an analysis and projection. So you can see all that there, what it would come into. And given where the polls came back, many people were pleasantly surprised at the polling numbers that Godby shared with us at the August. Was that really just the last board meeting? August 27th was the previous board meeting. Okay, I'll believe you. That TBWD and Godby suggested that we move forward with this structure, with the 10-year term, and at that amount. So we just wanted tonight, again, there's not any, this is again discussion. We're not asking for the passage of any resolution or anything, just the opportunity. We want to make sure the board has plenty of opportunity to discuss and the public has plenty of opportunity to provide input on any potential parcel tax renewal. So with that, questions?
Thank you. I'll just open it up. Any questions?
And I think at the meeting at the end of August, it was good to hear and to look at the results of the polling to see that there is support for the district. Mm-hmm. I think as we looked at the different levels that were surveyed, I think we all agreed that the voters were generally supportive of the district and different levels. And so I think then moving forward, it's really based on sort of talking about the budget and such, and figuring out where to go with it. But it's nice to have that the initial support and to move forward with it.
And on the flip side of that, if we don't get these funds, or if we keep at our current level of funding through the parcel taxes, having gone through firsthand on a committee member on the Fiscal Advisory Committee, turning every stone to find where we could make a cut. It is absolutely going to be necessary that we remove teachers and programs if we aren't able to do this. We already heard from the student trustees tonight that the increased enrollment is affecting the student experience. And we're not done growing. So I fully support us moving forward with these numbers.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the amount of analysis you've done in terms of, I know the time you put into and all the variables you looked at to provide a accurate forecast for the district. And I think it's, I too was really pleased with the polling results and to really understand what the community values in the way of our programs, but also to be, to know what their comfort level is in terms of how much funding they were able to provide, knowing, and knowing that it did merge with what we needed was very, very good news. And along the lines of what Karen just said, I don't know where else we could cut. If we go to the next level, the district would be a very different district.
Yeah.
So we're really fortunate that the district's in such good shape now, even with the cuts. I think you have done an excellent job with the cuts you've made. I too, it was noticeable to hear the students with the experience, and on the other hand, I thought, wow, it's nice that these are the problems we have. I mean, that's actually, I was hearing that too. It's that if students,
That they had to take
I
it
didn't get
seventh
to get
period
my
and not
seventh period.
sixth.
Some of it, I thought, gee, we really are pretty darn lucky. And wait till you get to college and you don't get any of the classes you want to get. So it made me almost appreciate more what we have. Hearing their concerns gave some a different perspective. It was good to hear that. So. No, I appreciate all the work, and I too, I'm based on what your forecast, and I know we've gotten snippets of it, the last few months during your presentations here at the board. I'm very comfortable with the, I think it's the 191 number and what that translates to, and I'm very pleased with the term. We're in a very different situation than we were a year ago. So, thank you.
Sure.
I agree with everything that has been said, both at the August 27th meeting and tonight. And I do. It was interesting to hear from the students, and this is a new era for them. And I think we need to keep a focus on it's a new era for us. So, and I'm sure the district will work on the policies regarding drop ads, regarding staffing classes, getting it set earlier. Because coming from a district where that is set in stone in March, and drops are not allowed after you sign the AP contract. You're not guaranteed, so you don't end up with a class of 20 that's projected to be 28, because then that pushes.
Sure.
Somewhere else in the system.
Well, we heard it. That's why they had to collapse the class.
So right.
So it wasn't that admin didn't know what they were doing.
Exactly.
It was that kids were allowed to drop out of that class,
Right.
which precipitated the closure of a section in order to accommodate those who had dropped and needed another English class.
Exactly. So, and I'm sure we'll continue working with that. And then one thing I also wanted to highlight was that while we have been making do with the cuts, we've asked our superintendent to really work a 1.8 job over the last year, incorporating the curriculum and instruction director along with her position. And we know that's not tenable going forward if we want to keep the superintendent, and we do. So that would be a potential add back that is something that we would discuss, but that's certainly been an area where we have been making do, but probably is not advisable going forward.
Yeah, I do want to thank you for pointing those things out. I appreciate it. And what we want to make clear is, we projected balanced budget, not excess, we are trying to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. We know that it's getting more expensive to educate kids, and we know that this is a new era for all of us. This was the first iteration of us scheduling like this, where it was a much tighter schedule, and there was just a no, sorry, you can't change that class. Those other classes are full, and that's a change for our students, but it is how most districts do business. And to me, that is not necessarily, once kids get used to that, they'll get used to it, and it's going to be a much more thoughtful maybe conversation in February about what classes I'm going to take in the fall. It's also very reasonable for districts to weigh, they'll do a lottery. If it's a class that juniors want into, but they could take as seniors, it's very reasonable to say, nope, sorry, you get to take that next year. We're going to prioritize seniors in this class. Those are just practices that help us keep some of our expense down while still providing those programs and courses to students. And that's what we have done this year. I have to say, the staff at the sites, the admin team, have worked miracles in getting these schedules balanced and making sure every kid is in a class that they want. It wasn't easy, but they were able to really do that. But it was a tight process. Corbett and I joke about spreadsheets. Right? I don't know if I dream or if I have nightmares about spreadsheets, but they're ever present in my brain. We've been looking at seat counts quite a lot. So,
I want to clarify something too. We make little jokes about, these poor kids, they have to take a seventh period and have third period off instead. Yeah, yuckity yuck. But there were also comments made and about classes being really crowded. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of required classes. Many of the science classes are required. And when you're working with lab equipment and potentially dangerous substances or equipment, that gets scary. And kudos to the teachers who have agreed to take a higher student load. But that's hard, and it's hard for the teacher and it's hard for the student. So I again go back to the, I don't mean to use scare tactics, but I don't know where else we could possibly cut if we don't have these funds.
Right, but it's important to be clear, though, that while we listen to what the students are saying in terms of crowded classes and such, we didn't just come to the agreement in terms of class sizes based on budget constraints. We also looked at other districts. We looked at Acalanes, we looked at Mountain View, Los Altos, and other districts that are performing well, and these are the same numbers in terms of class sizes, so there's a basis for that. And so on a relative basis, this is different than it was last year, but when we look at other school districts that are well-funded and high-performing districts, we're in line with them now.
Yeah.
Agreed. There might also be a different physical space constraining some of our schools too. I don't know that for a fact, but some of these other schools might be a little more modern and have a larger classroom capacity. I know that at Redwood, there are a number of classrooms that can't possibly accommodate more than.
Yeah, we have some small classrooms.
Smaller classrooms. So, but I hear you.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I think these are all. The point being is that we know that it's an era of tightened belt moving forward, while also maintaining the integrity of the district, the integrity of the programming, the integrity of the instruction and the learning, and that's a balancing act.
Karen.
2 brief points.
Oh, go ahead. Thought you were going to say something. I was going to say, Karen. Okay.
Fine. Just give me my podium. To Trustee Ronish's point, I just want to reminder that while the assumption is that the $5.8 million of expenditure cuts made over the previous 2 years, all of them are ongoing. Just quick reminder, there's 2 exceptions to that. That was approved in the June budget. And also, there was a quick footnote, but 2 exceptions to that are reinstating a senior management position, administrative position in ed services, to your point, and also bringing back some reform department chair / teacher leader model at a more cost-efficient. So that's already baked into
Right,
the
good.
budget
Right.
and an ongoing basis as well. And next steps with this. And then we're also going to be engaging, much like we did last year, going on the road to staff meetings this fall. Now that the board is here, this information regarding the budget, the on-audit actions, we're going to share that with staff. I think that's critical that staff is engaged with that, understand it. So we're going to be doing that as well in September, potentially in the new year as well.
Good, thank you. Anything else? So this is an information item. You don't need any direction or just, thank you. Very helpful. Public comment. I'm so surprised.
So I'm unhappy to do this, but I would like the minutes to show that I'm here, Mimi Willard from Kentfield, to suggest to you that approving this $190 parcel tax increase as proposed is incautious. I think it's a risky move that could harm the district because I think it has a decent chance of failing. $190 more than doubles where you were from fiscal 18 to 21. It's a 10-year term, even though the enrollment soon peaks, and it's a flat parcel tax. I discussed this with the board of the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers, and they're particularly concerned with the last of these, and said that they're unlikely to support this tax measure as proposed. A flat parcel tax is unfair to owners of single-family homes and condos because apartments and commercial properties pay very little. If it passes, it's because apartment dwellers and exempt seniors provided the margin to, in effect, tax other people. Cost is on record as being strongly opposed to flat parcel tax. We did support Measure J because of the urgency, this pending insolvency, and to give new management and board some time, and it was only 4 years. And Measure J passed despite polling that kind of looked like what your current polling looks like. But you got a good margin over that polling amount, and it may have had a little bit, at least, to do with the fact that Cost endorsed it and was featured in your promotions of the campaign. So my recommendation, my personal recommendation, would be that the board take a serious look themselves at the risk-reward of pursuing a per-square-foot parcel tax. The legal landscape has changed significantly in the last 9 months. At the last meeting, go back, look at the video. Both of your consultants alluded to this, that things have changed. There was the Don Linger decision, which I brought for you, which was an appeals court decision that clarified a uniform parcel tax in language that clearly also pertains to schools and cites Baricus. The Supreme Court declined to hear further appeal beyond the appellate level. Recent legislation, AB 2954, also permits a tax on unimproved parcels, which together as a bundle makes sense with the per square foot approach. And I think because of these developments, your likelihood of being sued has declined significantly. I'm not a lawyer, but that's what I've been told. So I think your job is to compare the hypothetical, perhaps unlikely risk of legal costs with the very real chance that your measure fails. $190 polls at 66.6% informed vote, plus or minus 3.7%. The board did not ask your consultants in open session to give guidance on 190 versus 90, which polled a little bit better. I think you'd want to know that. Cost will obviously not support you if you go in this direction. We might oppose. You've got the county fire tax on the same ballot, which will be about $230 per average home, more
Mimi?
for many. The fire,
Are you close to wrapping
I'm
up?
close to finishing.
How quickly? Because it's after
okay, the
3
fire
minutes.
tax will be a per square foot approach as well. You've got the new MMWD tax-like fee hitting water bills now. And so I think in closing, it's not a good thing to have your tax measure fail. The district spent money on consultants, mailers, and polling. Foundation will have spent money that, in hindsight, might have been spent in the classroom. and it
Thank you.
creates uncertainty and budget pressure. So I hope that you will look at all this seriously and consider taking the time perhaps to go to the November 2020 ballot if you don't think that you have all the information that you need. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to pass this down. Any other comments or clarification before I move on to the next agenda item? Okay. Okay, thank you. I was looking for that. Okay, thank you. So, board members, I'm passing, I should probably clarify for Karen and Dan. I take it back.
No,
Karen, you
Karen
were
was
here,
here,
but
yeah.
Dan was not here. So we added an urgency agenda item. Is that what it was called? Thank you, I got it right. I'm going to pass this whole thing down. And it was for purposes, we did receive advice from legal counsel that in this sort of situation and this type of agenda addition, it can be termed as an urgency agenda item that we add because we need to evaluate this before the next board meeting. So I'm going to hand it over to Corbett to explain this. None of us have seen this before. It's the first time, so he's going to explain what this is about.
Actually, I might hand over to Dr. Topi briefly, given her conversations that began today.
So the urgency item is reserved for just such a situation where something needs board approval, but the board and those creating the agenda were unaware of the item during agenda construction. So it's obviously has very limited uses. And the explanation for this one is this is a field trip for team that they do every year. And this, what happened, which has been happening to some of us, is that the field trip paperwork got stuck in the draft box, outbox of somebody's email. So you can see that the date was 8/26. So it obviously came to our attention through sort of, when it wasn't on the board agenda, I think people started saying, where is this? And realized that it had not actually made it out. For various reasons and obvious reasons, we could not wait till the next board meeting because the trip is scheduled to leave on the 24th, which is the day of the next board meeting.
Did something get cut off at the bottom? Was this a stamped receipt date?
I don't know what that is at the bottom. Corbett, do you know what that is? Oh,
What is that? Why isn't that?
I think it probably is a stamp receipt, and it was
It's a
yesterday.
stamp receipt from my office that's.
It was yesterday.
So you got this yesterday?
Yeah, it finally came when we realized that it was, I think that's when the realization to the people submitting it from team that my assumption here is that they looked at the board agenda and saw that it wasn't on there and wondered why, and that's when the wheel started churning.
So who signed it on September 10th?
Kim
Okay.
Stifler, the
You
principal of
recognize
Temescal.
it. Okay, I just didn't recognize that signature.
So, but why?
So she got it late.
So I'm confused, right? So if it's.
No, she signed it on August 26th.
But it's signed September 10th.
I can add to that.
She can, yeah.
So August 26th is the date, indeed, when one of the team teachers submitted it via email, but it got stuck in the draft that we talked about. Today we were working quite fervently to try to surface this. So when we found this out and realized there was a possible resolution that Dr. Tope researched with legal today, my assistant, who was up at a training at MCOE this afternoon from 2 to 4, who had this confirmation page, the verification form that's dated 9/10, I didn't have access to that in the moment given her files. So we was connected with Dr. Stifler and Mr. Best to say, can you simply come over and resubmit that so we can have that available. So it's dated today, which is indeed it, but we have a copy that my assistant just was up at a training, not able to access in the moment.
So when did Kim Stifler see it for the first time?
August 26th is when she saw it and
Oh, that's her
and approved
signature
it.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the,
Sorry.
the case wiggle.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But this part doesn't have to be, I'm confused, because you gave it to us as one document. So this field trip request form is submitted independent of the checklist? I thought the checklist had to be completed before.
It is, so you're right, it's on double-sided, so it appears that it's the same document. It's not.
not.
It's two separate documents that, just for sake of less paper, I printed double-sided for you this evening.
They didn't have access to the backside of it until, couldn't access it, so they printed a new one essentially.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's a duplicate that's done, not those first.
Well, I realize, so this
Yeah.
all, so the only thing you have to do to get a field trip on the agenda is to do the request?
Request and verification that all the steps are taken. The board, because this is a quote-unquote high-risk field trip, authorizes it under the conditions of our board policy. Then staff takes that direction, works with them to ensure that they complete all the various pieces, come to my office. I sign off under Assistant Admin Services.
Which is not
Once
signed here.
we've received all of them, confirm them. And then the field trip is officially approved at that point to begin.
Okay, and so, because I would like to avoid this happening in the future, right? So is this how field trip request forms are normally, if they're sent through email, as opposed to right? Because that's what, the reason is
Right.
why we're getting this so late, is because it got stuck in the draft folder. But is that how request forms are usually sent, or are they?
Some are paper-based, some are digital. We haven't had in my experience, we have not had this issue of it getting stuck in a draft box before, so it hasn't been an issue before. Redwood, literally, Gene Weiler marches them on over a paper copy. Other sites digitally submit. It varies.
Okay. Is it better to have paper copies? I mean, if the principal is to sign it.
For me,
Yep.
while this is an instance where the digital copy was a disadvantage, typically it's an advantage because we have a paper trail, we can follow up. So that's, in my experience, I prefer digital.
Okay.
This is an example where that did not play out well.
And what are the normal, I'm looking in the field, at the AR, what are the normal timelines for when the requests have to be submitted in
As
advance of the trip and then the documentation provided?
at least, preferably, is at least a month as a guideline. It's not a hard, fast rule, but we work with them to try to work with them to get it done in time for, obviously, a board meeting.
Okay.
This is a trip from personal experience at Tamascal. I know that working with staff and the millions of things they need to do, this is something we have to remind them this is urgent, given the start of the school year, new students coming on board. So
And this is separate, I mean, this is not going to hang this up, but where are the timelines for when, where can we find that on the timelines? Because it's that, you said a month, but this is 29 days. So, and if it's a recurring trip, this is surprising to me that this is something that they waited until really the last minute to file. It's 29 days ahead of time if you say it's a month. So why wasn't this filed at the end of the year, right? That's something for the future.
Yeah.
Where do we find the timelines
Sure.
for out-of-state field trips or overnight field trips?
we have a new staff resources page on our website. If you go to tamdistrict.org, click on the top right ribbon under staff. The third or second item down is staff resources. We've summarized a lot of information, and there's a key heading called field trips, and there's maybe 8 or 10 links where those are all linked there. So that's where you find
And
it.
is that out of a board policy, or is that out of, like, where are we getting those guidelines?
They're grounded in board policy.
Board policy.
Yeah.
And
There's some are, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's just not an excuse, but worth noting that for the past several years, the team person in charge of field trips and all this was Lenny, who retired in June. And Diana, who's in her third year at team, has just taken on the sort of organization and management of the field trips. So I do think part of this was also, because team is normally very on top of it. We usually get their field trip forms way in advance. So I do think part of this was a bit of a transition glitch.
Yeah. I would add to that, coincidentally, they invited me to meet with them, Eric Bess and Dinah Goldberg, last Thursday morning to talk about insurance field trips proactively. So this is, I can speak from personal experience with Diana and the team program. They take this quite seriously. Dinah was quite horrified that this happened. So she apologized prophetically and expressed gratitude to Dr. Topier for being one to bring this forward and pursue it.
Good. Any other comments, questions before I ask for a motion to approve this field trip? No? Okay. Can I ask for a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Corbett.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad you figured out how to approach this. So the next agenda item, which I'm going to suggest we table, unless you're raring to go, is but it is 9:05. I'll just mention that. We have the governance handbook, and the idea, if you recall, our governance workshop was that we would sequentially or iteratively, however it works out, grab a portion of the handbook and discuss it at the board meeting. But I'm frankly too tired. I think you are too. Kevin's not here, so I suggest we keep this, but we'll try it for next time. Thank you. So I think seeing by Dan doesn't look horribly sad. I think we have a
I'll make
majority
do.
of people, that'll move forward. So next is the superintendent's report.
I just want to provide a little bit of information about some things going on this month. I'll start with that it is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, and so there's a lot of activities going on countywide. We also have right here in Kreps on the 11th, tomorrow night, we have Talk Saves Lives presentation, which will start at 6:30. There is also the impact of listening at MCOE, which is from 7 to 9. I didn't write the date.
Was that tonight?
I thought it was Thursday night, but I'll double check. For edification of everybody, we do suicide prevention sort of throughout the year. We don't just concentrate it, and we do very concentrated student awareness and prevention workshops around high stress times for our students. While September can be high stress, what we have found is that college application deadlines, finals weeks, holidays, those things are highly stressful for our students. So we try to focus our efforts in those time periods. So we do a lot of stress relief related workshops. We also do a lot of our suicide prevention awareness and campaigns in those times. So we will have things throughout the year, but we are hosting the Talk Saves Lives. The other sort of big topic going on right now is the deaths due to excessive vaping. I think we have 6 confirmed nationwide. Yesterday, I sent out a communication. This morning, I sent out a communication. This morning, sometime, I sent out a communication to our community with information from Dr. Willis at the County Office of Public Health, as well as some resources from the Tobacco Toolkit from Stanford, which I highly recommend. Excellent resources online around tobacco cessation, vaping, a lot of information. Also information about the impact it has, particularly on adolescents. So I sent out the communication with some resources to our families, and there's some upcoming events on vaping as well. Again, tomorrow night, unfortunately, there's the Let's Talk About Cannabis and Vaping, which is at MCOE at 6:30. There is also a town hall on September 26th from 6:30 to 8 in Ross, and that one's the consequences of underage substance use. And that's sort of a little broader, but we'll also hit on vaping. There's also a a book talk on October 16th at Dominican from 7 to 9, and that's on the chef's new book called Hi, Everything You Want to Know About Drugs, Alcohol, and Addiction. So some resources for the community coming up that are on some very important and pressing topics right now.
Thank you, Tara.
Just as a follow-up, did the vaping detectors get installed in the bathrooms? Are we getting a report back on that?
No, we are getting a report back. Those are being donated to us, and so we're sort of waiting for them to process them and send them along. And we also they need internet access. So for some of our campuses, we had to do some coring through walls.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to trustee reports. This is just a time to share anything with fellow trustees that you think is important, not to have any long discussion about it, but it's also a time if there's any agenda topics you in particular would like us to consider. We'll take note of those and probably discuss them further at the future meeting, but it's just a time to have an exchange.
A future agenda item, and I've asked for this before, I think, is I want some discussion about how we look at policies and how we review policies. And in the district that I served for 13 years, we had a policy subcommittee where 2 trustees sat on it with the superintendent. I know it's different here. Wes is involved, but I'll just preview that on my board evaluation, I gave us 1 star on board knowing policies and implementation of policies. And because those are board policies, we have to have some discussion about that.
I have a couple thoughts. One is I would like to hear more about the vaping issues and what we as a district, I know so often we're doing so much more than I ever realize, and I would like to hear more about the preventive work as well as what we're doing in terms of deterrence and restorative justice, you name it. I'd really like to hear more about that. And then also, in general, I would be interested in hearing more about, and it was something that came up today when I went to a meeting at noon, how the local police departments at each of our school sites, how they're interacting with our campuses and getting involved. And then the third thing is be interesting to see what areas we're consistent and not consistent with across the district. Things sometimes have come up that I think sound like a great way to go, and then I'm perplexed why we're not doing it at all the schools, although I know schools deserve autonomy. But for instance, the more discussion we hear about cell phone usage in the classroom, that's another topic I'd like to hear more about. So those are my thoughts.
And you reminded me of one, well, kind of. Will we get an update on the teen group you put together, Tara, about sexual harassment and sexual violence and all that?
So far, we've only been able to meet one.
Okay, I told us that, but yeah. And so it doesn't have to be next, but maybe after next meeting.
Okay.
And I guess it's probably going to be on the agenda soon enough anyway, just based on results coming back, but just what's happening in the classroom in terms of, well, CRNSS thinking about closing gaps and then thinking about what we're doing as a district to achieve that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very good. Thank you. So now we'll move on to the public comment on any item that's not on the agenda.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for letting me speak. I've written this out, so I'm just going to read to the trustees.
Can I'm going to interrupt you one moment because I
Yes.
normally read read an explanation, so I'll just say it. So this is a time that we do not, we can't comment back to unless it's a clarifying question.
Yes.
Because it's not agendaized, and we try and stick to 3 minutes. You're the only one here, so if it's a little bit over, the way Mimi went over, that's fine, but we try and stick close to 3 minutes.
Thank you.
But
Well,
thank you.
I think I've got it, so thank you. I appreciate that very much. Okay. So thank you for having me. My name is Barbara McVeigh. I live in Fairfax. My daughter is at Drake. I am so pleased to see the solar installations on our school campuses, as it shows me this district cares about the most vital issues our children face today, and that is the consequence of carbon, produced by big oil and other climate problems we're challenged by, including ocean acidification, melting polar ice caps, and out-of-control plastic pollution, among other issues. Therefore, you can imagine my shock when I reviewed the U.S. history book at Drake High School, revealing a complete lack, if not gross negligence, of vital U.S. environmental and political history that pertains to the future of our children. Someone needs to be held accountable for what I would describe as nothing short of endorsing GOP political propaganda and catering to a lack of integrity. President Jimmy Carter, our 39th president, who happens to still be alive, installed solar panels on the White House and pushed sustainable energy initiatives aggressively at a time we knew about carbon consequences, as documented in films, books, and more, as well as historic footage. Carter was a president who not only stood up to OPEC, the most powerful global oil consortium, in order to press our nation, as he described it in his speech, it is the moral equivalent of war to be independent of energy, but he also aggressively pushed us to a new sustainable energy model and economy, as I would describe as the first Green Deal of 1979. It was on May 5th, 1979, Carter announced the day of the solar age from Washington, D.C. What is even more disturbing is that President Ronald Reagan knocked down these aggressive energy initiatives, and you can virtually see on scientific charts the spike of ocean acidification due to the absorption of carbon in the early 1980s. Nothing is described in the history books of this evidence. Our children are dealing with the greatest crisis of humanity that we have ever dealt with in our known history. Nothing was talked about this tonight. To me, this gross mistake is nothing less than criminal. What's more, these history books contain nothing about the historic 1981 National Union strike of the air traffic controllers, when 12,000 families, including wives and children, striked against the hero of the Republican Party in order to stand for political honesty, and were willing to not only be labeled federal criminals for striking against a contract, but were willing to lose everything. I was a 13-year-old child waiting for the FBI to arrest my father. Nothing is in the books about that strike, historic strike. As a result, many did lose everything, while some were put into chains, put into prison, some committed suicide, and many are still recovering from that incredible, courageous act 40 years later, standing for political honesty and be willing to lose everything for it. A few more sentences. It's time for the school district to do what's right. I encourage this board to consider a letter of apology to all of the parents of this district back to 2008, the publication date of the U.S. history book, or when it was adopted in our schools, citing this gross oversight with an explanation of how to write these historic truths into the narrative of our children's education. I encourage the board to consider a written letter to Governor Newsom, as well as to President Jimmy Carter, with an apology. As a California Distinguished School District, we need to set the tone for the nation of what is right and what is historic truth. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
I have it printed out.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, I think that concludes public comments. So now, before I conclude, I'll hand it back to Karen to review the norms and a scorecard of sorts. So actually, I realize, have you ever done this with us?
I haven't, but
Okay, so you give us a narrative
I know
of
the
how
routine.
you think. Yeah, I wasn't sure. It just occurred to me.
I've witnessed it at other school districts.
Okay. Which one would that be?
I don't know. I forget. I think we did a good job deliberating and listening openly and having some really good dialogue back and forth. And for sure, we focused on the best interest of all of our students with regard to certainly our field trip and our policies around protecting the well-being of our students.
I agree with that. I think I have to work with how I communicate with Cynthia. And I just need to think it through, and I think I respond to what I think is anger and frustration with me, and I'm having to think more about how I articulate, because I'm clearly not being understood. So I need to think about how I articulate my thoughts, and so that's where I think I need some improvement.
I can help you with that.
We get to have a subcommittee.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. With that, I will adjourn.